liberty and unity. O sons and daughters of Africa, flesh of the sun and flesh of the star, let us make Africa the tree of life.
Thank you. Please be seated. Very good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone following these proceedings right now. Welcome to the World Press Freedom Conference taking place in Windhoek, Namibia, the birthplace, some would say, of this very occasion, starting from 1991, when a very important and historic seminar took place here in Windhoek. And my name is Toivo Njabela. I am a co-champion of this year's World Press Freedom Day, of course, together with my lovely co-champion here, Gwen Lister, who was part of that historic mission, 1991. She co-chaired the proceedings that birthed the Windhoek Declaration. Gwen, how are you today?
Thank you, Toivo. And we're also very pleased to have with us here on stage today the Prime Minister of Namibia, the Right Honourable Sarah Nanjila Kukongelwa Amadila, the Prime Minister of the Republic of Namibia, I should say, as well as the Director-General of UNESCO, Audrey Azoulay. Good afternoon to you both, and thank you so much for joining us. I'm now going to actually ask, almost straight away, Dr. Paya Mushalenga, who is Namibia's Minister of Information and Communication, to say his welcome words, if he's got 3 minutes. Also, as he goes up, to mention that Dr. Mushalenga was also co-chair of the steering committee which put together this World Press Freedom Day, along with UNESCO's local representative, Jafar Musa El Kadum. Thank you very much, Dr. Mushalenga. Please go ahead.
Prime Minister of the Republic of Namibia, Excellency Madam Audrey Azoulay, Director-General of UNESCO, all protocol observed. It is my singular honor and privilege to welcome you all to this 2021 landmark global conference of the World Press Freedom Day. As I welcome you, allow me to extend a special word of thanks and welcome to all our international guests who have braved the coronavirus storm and crisscrossed multiple borders from afar to join us in making this day. Your physical presence at this event today, notwithstanding the traveling challenge and threats by the pandemic, demonstrates the significance of press freedom, its independence, pluralism, and many other ideals that this conference advocates. I'm also pleased to welcome the national guests who travel from outside the capital city and our audience that are tuned in virtual platforms from across the globe. It is my hope that our deliberations at this conference will culminate and set a precedent of a freer press and better working environment for our journalists to do their work without fear and adverse demonstration, muzzling, or threat of any sorts, and that information as a public good is relayed to those who need it the most, our citizenry. Ladies and gentlemen, as a Minister of Information and Communications Technology in Namibia, as well as the custodian of media freedom in the country, I want to emphatically highlight the importance of a good and symbiotic relationship between the government, media as a fourth estate, as well as public and private institutions. A good working relationship between the media and governments provides for an informed citizenry that can partake in the country's economic activities to propel sustainable economic development. Since Namibia journalists enjoy a relatively good working environment, as testified by Namibia's first place ranking in terms of press freedom in Africa, we join the community of other nations to call upon governments and countries where press freedom is suppressed and where journalists are threatened for carrying out their work to change course and harness the benefits of press freedom. We stand in solidarity with those journalists that face untenable and banal threats, either online or in person daily across the globe. In conclusion, I once again welcome you all and believe that you will find arrangements put to your disposal useful to conduct fruitful deliberations. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Pia Mshalenga, Namibia's Minister of Information and Communication Technology, for your wonderful and warm welcome to the guests. We will just play a short, nice, beautiful video from the Namibia's Ministry of Information and Communication Technology for our audience, and then we proceed with the program. Thank you.
Beautiful Namibia. How we wish that all these delegates online, so many thousands, were able to join us here in Namibia were it not for the COVID pandemic. So we hope next time we're going to get that right. In the meantime, I'd like to once again warmly greet our Prime Minister, Kukongelwa Amadila, and also Madame Azoulay for joining us here today. But also a very big thanks to everybody joining us around the world virtually. And there are, as I've already mentioned, a few thousand people online. It is such an honor for me to be at the opening of the 2021 World Press Freedom Conference, 30 years after the historic Windhoek Declaration, which brought about so much change for the African continent and even further afield. That was, as everybody knows, a meeting organized by UNESCO and partners, including 63 journalists from 38 countries in Africa who got together to promote the theme of promoting an independent, free, and pluralistic African press. So I think we are now going to see a video to remind us of how it started back then, with some of the testimonies, among others, of Alain Modou, who was then the UNESCO Assistant Director-General and one of the driving forces behind that landmark 1991 declaration. Please cue the video.
It was exactly on the 9th of November, 1989, and exactly that day happened something unbelievable, the fall of the Berlin Wall. Big professional media organizations challenged me, and in fact I was new at UNESCO. I just arrived in Paris a few months, more precisely, a few months before the general conference. And they challenged me and they said, Alan, Now, the UNESCO has a new communication policy. Are you ready to organize a meeting with journalists from Eastern Europe who fought against their own government, who are not part of the party or the state media, and even some of them were in the underground press, working for the underground press? I said, well, I take up the challenge. And it was a very strange meeting, because for the first time we had at UNESCO a group of people who were, let's call it, not the friends of, not to say enemy, but not the friends of the governments. And the Director General decided to make available the room where normally the Executive Board of UNESCO is meeting. It's a big circle, and you had all the journalists on the seats in front, and behind the diplomatic representatives. The diplomats, it was very moving, very emotional, of course. The journalists gave very interesting testimonies about their daily life. So at the end, African diplomats came to me and said, but Mr. Manu, it was fantastic, this meeting. Do you think that democracy is just for the Europeans, or do you think that we can have it in Africa? It would be appropriate to have such a meeting in Africa. I said, well, yes, I'm ready to submit the idea to the Director General, Mr. Mayor, and we will organize it. And this is how it started.
When I received the invitation, the theme, Seminar on Promoting an Independent and Pluralistic African Press, sounded very exciting to me, because especially at that time in Africa and in Ghana, the press operated in quite a hostile environment.
I can't tell you what an amazing experience it was at the time to meet journalists from across the African continent, because don't forget, we were under apartheid rule until a year before that, and our movability, if you like, around the continent was almost impossible for us to have that sort of connection with our compatriots in different parts of Africa.
I co-founded a weekly newspaper together with a friend. The paper was The Monitor, and we came out 1st September 1989. And it was a hard time, hard going. So many impediments were put in our way, and eventually the paper collapsed.
A lot of the stories that people told at the conference were horror stories of journalist experiences in the African context, who were either jailed or harassed or had their newspapers burned down.
So the Monitor was considered an enemy newspaper by the government, so they wouldn't help us. So that was another reason why the paper could not survive.
That a number of the journalists who were invited to come were in jail at the time. And so due to Alain Moudou and of course the then Director-General of UNESCO, Frederico Mayor, they managed to secure the release of, among others, Pius Njabe himself, to be able to travel to Windhoek to attend this seminar.
In fact, apart from the state-owned media, which had the 4 main papers, all the independent papers were mostly sports or lottery newspapers, and they were four pages, as I recall.
Whether it was Pius Njabe or anybody else, these people I'd heard about and met for the first time. So that was absolutely just a wonderful experience that I think can't be underestimated.
What wonderful memories there, Gwen, with your friends. Just going back into memory lane and seeing all these beautiful faces and everybody recalling exactly what transpired must be something surreal to you.
Absolutely, and remembering all the stories of, as I say, as the Ghanaian journalist indicated, of hardship across the continent, and so happy that that declaration was able to pave the way for a more free and independent environment for media on the continent.
Indeed. And it was those events that led, of course, to the United Nations eventually in 1993 adopting the World Press Freedom Day. And that is what is congregating us here today in Windhoek. And it's such a delight to celebrate it today with those that are in this room, and of course also those that are following online. We are told that about 3,000 people have registered to attend this conference online, and that is very beautiful. We hope that you have been enjoying the pre-conferences that have taken place so far since last Thursday.
Thanks for that, Toivo. And also, not to forget to everyone here and out there, virtual and in reality, that the hashtag World Press Freedom Day is there. Please write about whatever you want to do with press freedom. We really need to hear those views and about our conference. Next up is another champion of press freedom, and that is Mr. Antonio Guterres, United Nations Secretary-General. And he's going to give us a message today, of course, virtually. So we look forward to hearing what he has to say. Please cue the video.
Societies. During the pandemic and in other crises, including the climate emergency, journalists and media workers help us navigate a fast-changing and often overwhelming landscape of information, while addressing dangerous inaccuracies and falsehoods. In too many countries, they run great personal risk, including new restrictions, censorship, abuse, harassment, detention, and even death, simply for doing their jobs. And the situation continues to worsen. The economic impact of the pandemic has hit many media outlets hard, threatening their very survival. As budget tightens, so too does access to reliable information. Rumors, falsehoods, and extreme or divisive opinions surge in to fill the gap. I urge all governments to do everything in their power to support a free, independent, and diverse media. Free and independent journalism is our greatest ally in combating misinformation and disinformation. The United Nations Plan of Action on the Safety of Journalists aims to create a safe environment for media workers across the globe because information is a public good. Today, we commemorate the 30th anniversary of the Windhoek Declaration for the Development of a Free, Independent and Pluralistic African Press. Despite dramatic changes in the media over the past 3 decades, the Declaration's urgent call for press freedom and free access to information is as relevant as ever. Let's reflect on its message and renew our efforts to protect media freedom so that information remains a life-saving public good for all.
Thank you very much, Secretary Guterres, for that wonderful message vibrating through the system here in Windhoek, Namibia. We now have, of course, we know by now that this event is co-organized by the government of Namibia together with UNESCO, who have been throughout this journey with us since 1991. So it's a beautiful thing that UNESCO is still very much involved in that. I now have the singular honor of asking the UNESCO Director-General Audrey Azoulay for her opening remarks. Thank you.
Right Honorable Prime Minister Sarah Kungungwelwa Amadila, Honorable Ministers, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, here and online around the world. First, let me tell you how honored and pleased I am to be here in Namibia today to celebrate this anniversary, this anniversary of the Windhoek Declaration 30 years ago, and you saw how important it was, how innovative, courageous it was at the time, and the role it played as well in the political history of the continent and beyond. I'm happy also to be here to celebrate the courage and vision of the African journalists who embodied this declaration, and that includes, of course, our co-champion today, Toivo Njebela, and Gwen Lister, who has, as it's been reminded, was herself a crucial part of the adoption of the declaration. In adopting this Windhoek Declaration 30 years ago, the international community affirmed that information was a public good at a time when, as we've seen, it was far from being assured. The three key concepts that were underlined then remain absolutely paramount today, still: independence, freedom, and pluralism. But this anniversary today is not just a reminder of the past. It is a commitment, a collective commitment to take for the future, a commitment to keeping the spirit of the Windhoek Declaration alive. Naturally, this means stepping up our work to keep journalists safe, the first issue affecting press freedom, and an area in which UNESCO leads global efforts through the United Nations Plan of Action. But our latest report on the safety of journalists shows that the situation remains deeply troubling. Over the past 10 years, one journalist has been killed every 4 days, and 17 have already lost their lives in 2021. We also know that now most journalist killings take place in countries that are not experiencing armed conflicts, and 90% of these crimes remain unpunished. We're working together with our member states and civil society around the globe to better protect journalists. First, by helping to monitor the situation. For example, through a platform for journalist safety in Africa that we've launched very recently, last January, with the African Union. We're also helping to enhance, to adapt legal frameworks like we've done recently in places like Sudan or Tunisia, among others. We're also now training judges, prosecutors, and judicial actors in general on freedom of expression. 18,000 of them since 2013 in Africa, in the Arab region, and in Latin America. Our new global online course for the judiciary with Oxford University will be getting soon underway to help protect journalists worldwide. More than 2,000 judges across the world have already enrolled so far. But the physical safety of journalists is not, and by far, our only concern. Online harassment is a growing issue, and women are the primary targets. Online harassment, according to a new UNESCO report, which we've just released, shows that it's an issue for 3/4 of all women journalists that have already experienced violence online. Our report details the many terrible and new forms of this harassment, including analyzing over 2.5 million social media posts directed at two among the most targeted women journalists. This avalanche of abuse is not only damaging their situation, but is also very strong. This brings us to one of the issues of our conference this year, the issue of social media responsibility. The digital revolution, which began in the 1990s, has given visibility to an extraordinary variety of voices and viewpoints, but it has also created new challenges. Responding to these challenges is precisely the aim of this new Windhoek conference, as we look towards a new declaration 30 years after the first. This first challenge is ethical, the need for more transparency and accountability from the global online platforms that shape information today. While these platforms may not create content themselves, they have enormous power over what is seen, what is read, what is heard, and what is shared. It has become a question of democracy because it affects the very foundation of public debates. For much of the population, these platforms have become the dominant source of information, despite being echo chambers for rumors, sometimes hate speech and conspiracy theories. A 2019 study by the MIT showed that falsehoods are 70% more likely to be shared than verified information and spread up to 6 times faster. We must demand greater transparency of these platforms, transparency about their processes to moderate and curate content moderation, transparency about their algorithm, transparency about data collection and use, transparency about the measures they take to fight misinformation and hate speech. UNESCO stands ready to lead this debate to better regulate these platforms in line with international standards on freedom of expression. For several months, we've been carrying out several consultations, including with major platforms themselves, to define general principles for transparency. These principles, published at this conference, are, we believe, a first step in this global conversation and in developing new global standards. The second challenge I would like to mention is people's growing susceptibility to rumors and false news. It is not enough just to have access to information. We must also be able to assess it, each one of us, to assess it critically. And therefore, media and information literacy has become one of the most essential skills for the 21st century. This is why we, at UNESCO, overhauled our media and information literacy curriculum that we just launched last month in Serbia. A curriculum which aims to give learners worldwide the resources they need to address recent technological development in the distribution of information, like artificial intelligence, but also deepfakes. In these critical times, we need more than ever critical thinking. The third and final challenge I would like to mention is the economic crisis befalling independent journalism. It's something we must take very seriously. Media saw their business models upended by the digital transformation, but they are now being hit very hard by the health and economic crisis, and it's especially true for independent media. Nearly 90% of all media have lost revenue because of the pandemic. UNESCO, in partnership with the World Association of News Publishers, is now carrying out research to document these existential risks to the viability of news media and propose new financing and investment models while also always preserving editorial independence. These 3 themes of our 2021 World Press Freedom Conference, transparency of platforms, media viability, and education, media and information education, reflect the issues affecting information in the 21st century, its production, dissemination, and reception. We must address these issues together if we are to make information a true public good. And it's been said, but I want to say it again, there is no better place to do so than here in Windhoek, in this global capital of freedom of expression, including for the many vibrant media that exist here. This country knows the value of freedom. Of course, there is no country which is immune from the challenges I mentioned, but this young republic is the top-ranked African country in the World Press Freedom Index. What a victory this is. And indeed, this commitment to freedom was again demonstrated very recently when the country tabled its first access to information bill, which UNESCO is pleased to be supporting, and also launched the Namibia Media Professional Union. I would like to therefore very warmly thank Namibia, its civil society, but also its government and the President of the Republic of Namibia, His Excellency Dr. Hage Geingob, for their invaluable support for press freedom, for this conference, for UNESCO. The President, I believe, was then Prime Minister when 30 years ago the conference was opened. Can you believe that the Republic was just 1 year old, and this is where history took place. So thank you for being here, being with us, being online with us. Thank you for making this spirit alive still today. And thank you for this inspiration it brings to us. Dapalula, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, DG, for your wonderful words. Gwen, I thought I saw you nodding throughout the speech of the DG as if you agreed with almost every point that you made.
Well, I think the Director General definitely outlined and articulated very succinctly some of the major challenges facing journalism today, and of course UNESCO's role in some of those challenges, which include obviously the critical issue of journalism safety, the fight for sustainability of independent and good journalism, the disinformation pandemic and what to do about it. And of course she also addressed the issue of people's receptivity to a lot of the disinformation and media literacy, and how we can use that to help people decipher and, you know, be able to judge the good from the bad, especially on social media. And of course the three themes of this conference, which include transparency and viability of media. So very important issues, and thank you for that, Director General.
Thank you, Gwen. I now have again the privilege to call to the podium the Right Honorable Prime Minister of Namibia, Madam Sarah Nanjila Kugongerwa Amadila, to give us her speech. Thank you.
Thank you very much, co-directors of ceremonies, Honorable Speaker of the National Assembly, Professor Peter Kachavivi, Honorable Ministers present here and Deputy Ministers, as well as Members of Parliament of the Republic of Namibia, Your Excellency, the Director-General of UNESCO, Ms. Audrey Azoulay, Honorable Governor of Commerce Region, members of the Diplomatic Corps, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, very good afternoon. It is our pleasure and honor as a country to welcome the delegates and participants at this world event marking the 30th anniversary of the Windhoek Declaration and celebrating this year's Press Freedom Day. Some delegates are participating in this conference virtually due to COVID-19 pandemic that has disrupted our lives. We are pleased to host them virtually and look forward to welcoming them physically to Namibia in the future. 30 years ago, African journalists united in their quest for freedom of expression, independent and pluralistic press assembled in our capital, and in fact at this same venue, and adopted the landmark Windhoek Declaration, culminating into the World Press Freedom Day as declared by the United Nations General Assembly on the 3rd of May, 1993. This event, therefore, has historical significance for Namibia, and it is our special honor for us to host it. Namibia has traversed a long journey in areas of freedom of speech and expression, independent and pluralistic media, as well as universal and human rights records since our independence in 1990. We are ranked as the country with the freest press in Africa and 24th in the world out of 180 countries in the latest Press Freedom Index by the Reporters Without Borders. Namibia has held this first position in press freedom in Africa since 2013, except in 2018 when we came second to Ghana. The rights and freedoms of the citizens and residents of Namibia are guaranteed in the Constitution, which entrenches a Bill of Rights encompassing the freedom of the press and other media. Over the past 31 years of our independence, no journalist or media practitioner or any resident of this country has been threatened, ganged, imprisoned, tortured, or killed in Namibia for any reason. I therefore take this opportunity to unreservedly reaffirm the Namibian government's commitment to press freedom as expressed in our Constitution. Ladies and gentlemen, this year's event is being observed under the theme of information as a public good. With the advent of social media and other information technologies that characterize the internet age of instant dissemination of information, it requires of the media to be more circumspect by analyzing and giving perspective to the floating information to ensure that it is reliable and ready for public consumption. Meaningful and factual information remains the pulse of any democracy and good governance. Ladies and gentlemen, when he took office in 2015, President Hage Geingob declared war on poverty. Fighting poverty does not only comprise of distributing economic resources to the impoverished communities, but also includes provision of quality information to the people at the grassroots level of society to afford them an opportunity to meaningfully participate in the social and political spheres of the country. We have recently concluded the Harambee Prosperity Plan 2, an action plan of the Namibian government towards economic recovery and inclusive growth. The plan prioritizes the implementation of targeted policy programs to enhance service delivery, contribute to economic recovery and engender inclusive growth, and poise Namibia to respond to domestic and global socio-economic challenges and opportunities during and after COVID-19 pandemic. The government also unveiled the Namibia Investment Promotion and Development Board, which aims to promote, attract, and retain both domestic and foreign investments. The board is tasked with the responsibility of developing new investment strategies and explore synergies with the public and private sector to create a conducive investment environment in the country. The government is thus encouraging the media to use its media freedom power responsibly and support the efforts of government to improve the living standards of the people. We know that we attract what we celebrate the most. As we celebrate World Press Freedom Day today, let us think of how media professionals can help with nation building and contribute to economic growth and prosperity for all. In modern times, the media exude enormous power of serving as a valuable forum for articulating the affairs of the country to the people. However, since the business of the news is time-bound, in some instances, journalists compromise their fact-checking and verification processes, resulting in dire damage in a social context. As such, the rights and responsibilities ought to be established to safeguard the integrity of the media. Journalists, therefore, have to remain loyal to the public by prioritizing the public interest before their own personal beliefs and quest for profit-making. And I am very happy to hear what the Director-General of UNESCO has said in terms of the capacity-building efforts that are being pursued by the organization to assist the media fraternity and other stakeholders in development to optimize their interaction in the manner that is going to optimize the welfare of our communities. In turn, as a government accountable to the people, we will ensure that the public has convenient access to public information they need to make informed decisions. And we are very grateful for the acknowledgement of the efforts that we are making in this regard as a country, including through the introduction of the Access to Information Bill in our Parliament. With these few words, ladies and gentlemen, I now declare the 2021 World Press Freedom Day and the Windhoek Declaration's 30th Anniversary Commemorative Conference officially open. Thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you, Right Honorable Prime Minister Sarah Nanjila Kugangelo Amadila, for your very for your beautiful message, and Gwen, for me, what stood out for me from the Prime Minister's message is, of course, as a practicing journalist in Namibia, the reaffirmation of government's commitment to press freedom, and of course also the reminder from her that we do our job responsibly, especially in a world filled with so much fake news and everything. Yeah. What was your impression?
Yes, I think exactly, very important that the government has recommitted itself to press freedom. These are always very encouraging words to hear, so we're very thrilled about that. And of course, the Prime Minister also spoke of Namibia's place in press freedom in Africa and further afield, something we can probably, the President has been on record before, hoping we'll improve our global position and global standing. So that's the next step, and maybe, hopefully, an access to information law will become a reality, and that will help us to get there.
Definitely. So now that the global conference of this important subject of press freedom has been officially opened by the Prime Minister, it's time to dance a little bit. We have a performance lined up from Diolini, and while they are giving us that piece of art, may I then ask the Prime Minister and the Director-General to just move into their reserved seat there. Thank you very much. Diolini, please give us your...
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Diolini, for that beautiful piece of art. It's sang in Kwekwe, one of the local vernaculars here in Namibia. The message can always be communicated later as to what was being sang about, but it's all love and peace. I now have a few messages lined up. Let me start by introducing Ambassador Salah Hamad, head of the African Governance Architecture Secretariat at the African Union. Yes, thank you.
Right Honorable Prime Minister of the Republic of Namibia, Your Excellency Director-General of UNESCO, Excellencies, Ministers of the Government of the Republic of Namibia, Honorable Members of the Parliament of the Republic of Namibia, Excellencies, Ambassadors and members of the Diplomatic Corps, distinguished journalists, representatives of civil society organizations, members of the media and academia, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, all protocol duly and respectfully observed. I bring you greetings from His Excellency, Mr. Musa Faki Mohammed, Chairperson of the African Union Commission, as we celebrate the World Press Freedom Day 2021 under the theme Information as a Public Good here in Windhoek, Namibia, where the historic 1991 Windhoek Declaration for the Development of Free, Independent, and Pluralistic Press was drafted and adopted. On the onset, I wish to begin by thanking His Excellency the President of the Republic of Namibia, Her Excellency the Right Honorable Prime Minister and her government, and the people of Namibia for hosting this landmark occasion here in this very, very beautiful city of Windhoek. I also wish to pay tribute, in fact, a special tribute, to the Director-General of UNESCO and her staff for the role they continue to play in advocating for the freedom of expression, access to information, and the safety and protection of journalists from the adoption of the landmark Windhoek Declaration of 1991 to date. I also wish, on behalf of His Excellency, the Chairperson of the African Union Commission, to recognize our own African Union Commission on Human and People's Rights and the Special Rapporteur on Freedom of Expression and Access to Information for the hard work that they've been doing with the support of UNESCO to advocate for freedom of information and freedom and access to information on the continent. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, information as a public good is a public good. And certainly it is also a human right that is enshrined in the African Charter on Human and People's Rights and many other African Union shared values and instruments. This right cannot be enjoyed without ensuring access to information as well as the safety and protection of journalists who are playing an essential role in enabling participatory democracy globally and particularly in Africa. Journalists, through dissemination of information, can facilitate citizen participation in public decision-making and also in expressing their views freely and without any violations of rights. Therefore, journalism is not only important for information sharing, but also for participation, accountability, and good governance and democracy. The right to information as an African shared values is enshrined in many African Union instruments, but mainly in the Constitutive Act of 2000, which emphasized the need to promote and protect the rights and protect human rights on the continent. In fact, Article 9 of the African Charter on Human and People's Rights provides that every individual shall have the right to receive information. This, in addition to Aspiration 3 of Agenda 2063, the blueprint for the development of Africa, of the Africa we want and the Africa we deserve. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, in conclusion, the African Union reiterates its commitment to promote the right of access to information in this digital age. It is also the African Union Commission's expectation that this event taking place in this great city of Windhoek, the birthplace of access to information declaration, will avail a platform for the adoption of a robust and well-crafted standards that will support the advocacy for the promotion of access to information, as well as the safety and protection of journalists in accordance with norms and standards of the African shared values and instruments. On behalf of His Excellency, the Chairperson of the African Union Commission, and the entire family members of the African Union Commission, I wish to once again express our gratitude and appreciation to His Excellency, the President of the Republic of Namibia, and the Honorable Right Prime Minister and her government and the people of Namibia for hosting us and hosting this event, and also to the leadership and staff of UNESCO for organizing this important celebration. Let us collectively work together to promote information as a public good. I thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Ambassador Hamad, for your beautiful message and the reassurance of commitment from the African Union level. So we appreciate your message, sir. I am told, before I introduce the next item that the Right Honorable Prime Minister and the DG are at liberty to leave should they wish to do so. But otherwise, we are happy to have you here still. Okay, so as we know, this is a hybrid event where we have physical attendance and virtual attendance, and it is in line with that now we're going to introduce again some online messages from ministers across the world as far as press freedom is concerned. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I am delighted to be speaking to you today, albeit at a distance. And thank you, Namibia and UNESCO, for hosting the World Press Freedom Conference. Timothy was in his car with his girlfriend when he was blinded by the lights of a vehicle. At first, he had no idea what was going on. But when the vehicle got closer, he saw it was a digger coming straight at them. After their car had been shunted 10 meters backwards, men with steel pipes began hammering on the car. Paralyzed with fear, Timothy then saw the digger driving towards them at full throttle. It tipped their car over into a ditch, where it landed upside down. It sounds like a scene from a horror film, one that gives you the shivers and keeps you awake at night. Yet this is not fiction. Timothy is a Dutch press photographer who was responding to a call to capture a news story on film. He was attacked 2 weeks ago simply for doing his job. And while Timothy and his girlfriend survived and the perpetrators are being prosecuted, something fundamental was damaged: our free press. The right to record, write and communicate without fear. And this is just one example, a small one at that. Unfortunately, more gruesome and fundamental attacks on press freedom are taking place all over the world. I'm talking about murder, imprisonment, and impunity, continuous threats from authorities. And even as the safety of journalists is declining worldwide, and online harassment against female reporters is on the rise, some politicians are harming them further with anti-media rhetoric. In this harsh reality, we must embrace positive forces, like those set in motion by the unflinching African journalists who drew up the Windhoek Declaration 30 years ago. Their historic call for media freedom has persuaded countries to adopt laws that guarantee the right to information, to ensure attacks on journalists do not go unpunished, and to push for the development of diverse and independent media. Namibia itself is an example of a positive force, protecting and advancing freedom of the press. Thanks to our partnership, the Human Rights Council confirmed in July last year that freedom of expression and access to information are essential for the protection of other human rights, for democracy, and for a sustainable world. Last December, during the World Press Freedom Conference hosted by the Netherlands, almost 60 countries pledged to investigate and prosecute all attacks on journalists. The Netherlands also announced that it would give an extra 9 million euros to projects that enhance the safety of journalists. Ladies and gentlemen, we cannot allow sticks and stones to break the bones of free speech and writing. Let's continue to join positive forces. Let's work together so that journalists can do their work without fear. Thank you.
On the occasion of the 30th anniversary of the Windhoek Declaration for the development of a free, independent and pluralistic press, I would like to pay a special tribute to all the dedicated and courageous African journalists who were involved in this process. 30 years ago, they met in Windhoek and initiated a declaration on press freedom, which is a landmark up to this day, and which continues to be a catalyst in encouraging press freedom, independent journalism, and media pluralism worldwide. If anything, then the COVID pandemic has proven again very clearly to all of us the significance of freedom of press and freedom of expression. Only they can guarantee access to reliable information. And without reliable information, we cannot safeguard public health, ensure accountability, or uphold democracy. We simply cannot fulfill the promises of peace and sustainable development. Thus, by protecting journalism and journalists, by respecting freedom of press and expression, we are actually safeguarding our way of life and even our own physical well-being. Therefore, this must be our priority, now as well as in 10 years. Thank you.
The 30th anniversary of the Windhoek Declaration is a historic milestone. My thanks to Namibia and UNESCO for hosting this year's celebrations. Press freedom keeps societies informed. It lets people access information to protect themselves and their communities. It allows people to recognize problems and hold governments to account. And yet journalists and media outlets face unprecedented pressures, from changing business models to online harassment to violence. Digital technologies and the internet also pose significant challenges. Canada is committed to press freedom. We are taking action through the Human Rights Council, through the Freedom Online Coalition, through the Media Freedom Coalition, and more. Together, let's ensure people can enjoy all of their rights through press freedom and access to information. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, 30th anniversary of the Windhoek Declaration is a great opportunity to reaffirm our commitments to the main principles enshrined in this fundamental document. Access to the information must be universally ensured. Firstly, no journalist or other media worker must live in fear of reprisals against them. Most importantly, including danger to their liberties, health, and life. Their activities must not be restricted by economic, political, or any other form of pressure. Secondly, our media must be reliable. We must push back disinformation and propaganda. I'm using this opportunity to assure that Lithuania stands ready to do its part in promoting safety of journalists, freedom of expression and media freedom, and the right to verified information. Thank you.
The Windhoek Declaration is a landmark document ensuring press freedom around the world. It calls on governments to be proactive in ensuring the protection of journalists and media organisations. And here in the UK, we believe passionately in the principle of a free media. And that's why we joined together with Canada to form the Global Media Freedom Coalition, which we're proud to say now has 47 countries on board. Working together, we're championing media freedom and calling out abuses where and when we see them, most recently in Uganda, China, Belarus and Myanmar. We've mobilised our local diplomatic networks to engage with governments around the world when those abuses of media freedoms take place. We're using our G7 presidency and the Media Freedom Coalition to improve how we coordinate aid spending to support independent media where it's under threat. And we're also very proud to support the Global Media Defence Fund. Media freedom is fundamental to democracy here and around the world. We've got to keep working to protect it. Everyone should have access to the information they need to make informed decisions about their life. That's how democracy works. And it requires strong, robust and an independent media. And that's why we're determined to champion media freedom with our partners around the world, through the Global Media Freedom Coalition and through our presidency of the G7. The media is always changing and adapting. Who knows exactly what it will look like in 10 years from now? But its fundamental role in our society won't change. It will be the same as it was when the first newspapers were printed in the United Kingdom some 300 years ago. Their role is to inform, to give people the ability to discuss and debate the issues of the day freely, to challenge their governments, to make decisions in full possession of the facts. That's why we've all got to defend media freedom and why here in the UK we're absolutely committed to doing so.
People all over the world are entitled, as of right, to reliable, truthful information. And the people who bring us that information, the journalists and the media workers, are entitled to do their work without fear, without intimidation, without censorship. Press and media has changed dramatically in the 30 years since Windhoek, but the principles remain the same. Let's all recall them on World Press Freedom Day.
Thank you for those beautiful messages from across the world, coming really from a very, very good levels of government. So thank you for that. There is an interactive session coming up now, a very exciting one. But before that, we have a performance from our good friend Jackson Wahengo while everybody is getting prepared for that interactive session. Jackson.
All right.
Kwatangana wa mkadhona tulongere kumwe ne udafano onyoko ndinei ya no shukuru mono shoku kalukifa wokana ketu kadona kakatsa matita kakanda kadona kakateleke matita kalifei hawanga wangei na wanga dalile nangolo kadenda we Nkanai longei, wanailonga, nkanailonga, kwatengana wa mkadhona, tulongele kumwe, ne udafano, onyoko ntinei, na shukuru mono, shoku kalukifa, landuleni wetu, ngetohengana wa, haino tukanei, ngetohengana to ivonjebela ino tukanei, ngetohengana to ivonjebela ino tukanei, shokoholei, no ineshunino, shokoholei, no ineshunino, nangoro kadenda, nangoro kadenda, nangoro kadenda, nangoro kadenda. Kanailonga kwatangena wa mkadhona tulongere kumwe ne udafano onyoko ndina no shukuru mono nshaku kalukifa uokana ketu kadona kakatsa matita kakanda kadona kakatelekei matita kalifai hawanga wangei hawanga ndalile nangolo kadenda ngetohenga nato yanjebela inotukanei haiti ngetohenga nato ivonjebela inotukanei oshokoholei ineshuninu oshokoholei ineshuninu nangolo kadenda Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Jackson, our very own Jackson Wahengo. Wonderful song that was. And now, everybody, greetings once again from me, your co-champion. We're now moving into a talk show, which is going to be addressing the sort of key theme of this World Press Freedom Day, and we're going to ask the question, is information a public good? Now, there are so many questions around this topic, which includes the special role of journalism in verifying information, the different types of media and how best to address and whether one works better than the other, how the public, importantly, perceives information as a public good. Do they see it as a public good? And of course, the role of access to information in all of this. So I'm going to head over to our panelists shortly, but I want to just say in the meantime, don't forget the hashtag again, World Press Freedom Day, and also don't move, because after this talk show is coming the real highlight of this year's program, which is the awarding of the Guillermo Kano Prize, and you don't want to miss that. So first, before we get going with the panel, I'm going to ask the technical team to basically cue a video, and this is addressing the question we're looking at, and it features Joseph Stiglitz, who, as you all know, is a prominent economist, global economist, Nobel laureate, who is being interviewed by Miranda Johnson, the Economist's deputy executive editor, and we also thank the BBC for giving us this insert. So if you could cue Joseph Stiglitz. Thank you.
Welcome to World Press Freedom Day 2021. The theme for this year's event is information as a public good. My name is Miranda Johnson, and I am The Economist's Deputy Executive Editor. And it is a delight and really an honor for me to be joined in this session by Professor Joseph Stiglitz, the Nobel Prize-winning economist, for a discussion that I hope will introduce some of the themes and issues and indeed concepts surrounding this year's theme. Professor Stiglitz, it's wonderful to have you here. I think many people have perhaps a slightly loose understanding of the term public good. Given the theme of this entire event, I wondered if you could very quickly give us the quite precise definition of that term that stems from economics.
It is used in a rather technical sense, and that is a good, the consumption of which by one person doesn't reduce the consumption of another. And it's a very old idea that knowledge is like a public good. Thomas Jefferson, the third president of the United States, talked about knowledge being like a candle. When one candle lights another, it doesn't subtract from the first candle. It continues to shine. And that was the idea that knowledge and information can shed light on all of society, of a benefit to all. But economists have emphasized when there is a public good, it can't be provided in the same way that a private good is produced. So it's not like when you buy an apple and you eat the apple, you're the only person who's going to eat the apple. If you get information and that spreads around everybody in society, that's a societal benefit. So you won't have the incentive to spend as much money on this public good as is economically efficient and socially desirable.
Absolutely, and those sort of dual characteristics of, as you said, sort of non-rival, non-excludable. I mean, we live in the information age, and those two characteristics don't always apply necessarily to information, and perhaps information, doesn't always meet the exact definition of a public good. What are the implications of that for news organizations and others who provide information?
Well, the traditional model for financing news has relied a lot on advertising. Basically, people, news organizations sell eyes. They sell news, but the reason people are paying in some sense is it's not the people who are consuming the news, but it's the advertisers. And the advertisers want the eyes of the people who are reading the news. So there's been what we call joint production between news and advertising. And the concern today is that that traditional model that worked for maybe 100 years has been disrupted by the social media. Because the social media do not produce news. They take other people's news and recycle it and disseminate it, but they'd be reluctant to pay for it. And so the system that had prevailed for a very long time, not universal, there were other business models like what is sometimes called the subscription model that, for instance, The Economist relies very heavily on, where people actually buy a subscription. But that's been a relatively small part of the news ecosystem. And you look at newspapers, it was advertising that kept them going.
Absolutely. And I think, as you wisely say, The Economist depends on it. And I know from our own articles that one of the upshots of the switch, as you said, more than 100 years ago towards the advertising model, was that actually a lot of coverage became sort of less polarized and more balanced, because advertisers didn't necessarily want to, companies didn't want to advertise next to sort of polemic pieces. Now we're on the other side of that, as you mentioned. Are there obvious effects from this shift towards social media on the nature of news that is being provided? I've been very interested to read some of your thoughts on how investigative journalism, for example, has been impacted.
Well, investigative journalism is a real good example of information as a public good. You can spend 1, 2, 3 years of the time of individuals to do a good investigative story. And then once it's out there, it's a public good. The New York Times, for instance, did some fantastic investigative journalism. But once the story breaks about what Trump's tax returns were, or everybody, they'll give credit to the New York Times about how they uncovered this. But credit doesn't give you, doesn't bring in money necessarily. So the result of that is that journalism has come to depend increasingly on foundations, on donations. And, if there were enough money, that would be fine. But unfortunately, relative to the needs, there has not been enough money. An example of this kind of investigative journalism was the Panama Papers that showed the web of dark money and the secrecy havens that involved political leaders in many, many countries, resignation of some political leaders. So it was information that was extraordinarily valuable, but that was an example of a collaborative effort of reporters around the world, but it had to be supported by basically by foundations.
You mentioned foundations donating there. I sort of wondered about other models that you thought might work, voucher systems, tax relief systems. I live in the UK, and the issue of paying the license fee for the BBC is, always hot.
I think the UK model, where you have basically a tax to support news, is a good model. Now, that particular tax is related to whether you have a radio or TV. I actually think that a system where everybody in society contributes, like you do to Fight for Defense, information is democracy. And since it is a public good, I think it should be publicly provided. There's some interesting ideas that are circulating. Australia has passed a law. It's requiring the big internet platforms, Google and Facebook, who make the revenue from advertising, to pay for some of the news that they use on their platform. And it's a particular framework of negotiations, and if they can't reach an agreement, arbitration. But it's basically a way of extracting some of the money, the enormous money that the platforms make, in part from the use of news that is being produced by the news organization, and they're just taking it without compensating. So there, you might say, we use the term in economics, free riding on what is being produced by the news organizations.
Two very important issues coming out of the Australian debacle, earlier in the year. I mean, certainly the fact that Facebook was able, almost instantly to, in terms of the impact on society and indeed, democratic rights and freedoms.
It was, Facebook's position was so contradictory. They said they didn't have any market power. Any firm that had no market power would not have done what Facebook did. It only thought it could get away with shutting down the flow of news because it believed it had market power. So it was totally an incoherent position. They were demonstrating or attempting to demonstrate their market power. Now, in the end, they gave in, and that's maybe an important lesson, that the platforms do have a lot of market power. That market power needs to be circumscribed. I've been advocating some kind of global competition authority, because these are globally a somewhat separate issue from this particular issue we're talking about, is how do you fund the news, investigative journalism. But it's not totally separate, because in fact, the fact that they have that market power means they're extracting rents. And the basic lesson of economics is you can tax those rents without any worry about economic distortion. A good source of revenue.
Absolutely. And I suppose the kind of controversial question arising from all of this is, should the big tech firms be regulated as public utilities? I mean, should that be thrown into the mix?
Oh, I think so, because we've been talking so far about the public good of information, but there is what I call the public bad of misinformation. And way back in the United States, when the platforms were first getting established, there was a law passed that gave them immunity from liability. And if the Economist publishes something that is slanderous or libel, you'll be sued. And
we live in fear.
You live in fear, and And that means, that encourages you to be responsible. The platforms were immune from that kind of liability. And you get what economists would have predicted, total irresponsibility. And that means, you know, in the midst of this COVID-19, spreading mis and disinformation about the COVID-19, about the safety of vaccines, discouraging people to get vaccinated. And the result, of course, is the risk that all of us are going to be put into, because a large fractions of people in many countries are not going to get vaccinated. So it's really undermining our society. And there's so many examples of hate speech, political manipulation, incitement, that it's become I believe, a major problem. That I think we have to, in one way or another, bring a better sense of accountability and responsibility to the platforms.
Professor Stiglitz, thank you so much again for your time, and thank you to all who've tuned in to view this session, and wishing you all the very best for the rest of the conference.
And thank you very much to The Economist for that video interview with Professor Stiglitz, which I think puts the context for our discussion nicely in place. Without further ado, I'm going to hopefully get the panelists online, and in order to save time, because we're moving shortly to the Guillermo Kano ceremony, I'm going to introduce the panelists as I ask their first questions, and I hope that is okay with everybody. So I'm going to start with Stephen Dunbar Johnson, who is, of course, the president of the New York Times. To Stephen, in trying to reply to the question, is information a public good? We need to probably start highlighting the important difference between information and, of course, other forms of communication content, such as entertainment and data. Not, of course, to speak about harmful content, such as disinformation and hate speech. What, Stephen, is the special role of journalism in producing news as verified information in the public interest? Go ahead, please, Stephen. Did you hear me?
Hello? So I didn't get
it sounds like a very bad connection with Stephen. I wonder if I'll go back to Stephen. Let me start with Jovial, and I'll return to Stephen. Hopefully we can fix that glitch. Jovial, if you're online, Jovial Rantau is, of course, the president of the African Editors Forum, TAEF, and Jovial represents the biggest editors association in Africa. Over 30 years ago, a lot of journalists met here in Windhoek to craft a vision about what was the burning issue at the time, the development of free, independent, and pluralistic media in Africa. And of course, the Windhoek Declaration made its mark, both on Africa and further afield. Jovial, can we expect, do you think, a similar or different impact from the Windhoek Plus 30 Declaration, which comes out of this 2021 conference?
Thank you very much, Gwen. I must say that, you know, it is the right time for all of us to celebrate the gift that Africa gave to the world. We stand on the shoulders of heroes who gathered in Namibia 3 decades ago and changed Africa and the world. The bold move by journalists and media practitioners and activists responded to the challenges of the time, the challenges of the end of the Cold War and one-party rules and the march of democratic progress the world over. The Windhoek Declaration changed the world in a way that all of us must celebrate. The conference taking place today has to respond to the challenges of 2021 and beyond.
Right.
And these challenges, in my view, include but are not restricted to the change of media economics as a result of, among others, the judicial revolution and COVID-19. It includes finding solutions to dealing with what the World Health Organization describes as infodemic, so that people's access to trusted, fact-checked information continues without obstacles. The challenges of 2021 are very, very different, as they should be, to the challenges that the generation of 1991 addressed, you know? And these challenges also include continued criminalization of journalism by some states in Africa and the world. This is something that we need to address. This criminalization has led to harassment, detentions, and the murder of journalists. The African Editors Forum believes that this conference must come up with solutions how a media struggling for survival can continue to provide information as a public good without a financial burden on people. As Amilcar Cabral, the great African scholar, said, every generation must define the challenges of its time and then fulfill its mission or abscond. This conference is defining the challenges of our time as African editors, just as our predecessors before us did. And we have no intention to shirk our duty, but to ensure that we meet the challenges of 2021 and beyond.
Thank you,
Gwen.
Thank you very much for that, Jovial, and obviously a very critical issue, and I hope that the conference will really come up and rise to the challenge that you've just presented. Stephen, can I go back to you if you are hearing me now? And just to ask you, what is the...
I can hear you, Gwen.
Great. What is the special role to you of journalism in producing news as verified information in the public interest?
Well, let me just correct a bit of misinformation, first of all. I am President International of the New York Times, not President of the New York Times. Just want to get that fact out there.
Sorry about that, Stephen.
Christophe Delattre, I think it was at Reporters Without Borders, said journalism is the best vaccine against disinformation. And I completely concur with that. Let me just give a very specific example of how journalism can be and is often a public good. And it's an example of the New York Times. When it became clear that no government or public health agency was tracking all cases of coronavirus in the US, New York Times journalists began building a comprehensive database of US coronavirus cases that was made publicly available to researchers, to scientists, and government officials to help them track and understand the spread of the virus. So I think that's a very clear, and that by the way, became the go-to source of information throughout the United States on the spread of the coronavirus. And since the outset of the virus, when it emerged from Wuhan, since January 23rd last year, we began maintaining a continuously updated live briefing, and which really provided a guide to readers to help them in the whole fire hose of information that was coming from everywhere to really understand it. We tried to digest it for them and make it very comprehensible. This is just, and by the way, that was the work of 1,100 journalists. So really, forgive me for using that as an example, but it's a recent one, and I think it illustrates exactly how journalism can be a force of public good.
Thank you very much. That's a very important project, that one. I'm going to ask now Hebe Ali, who is director of the New Humanitarian. Hebe, you represent a particular type of media which is not-for-profit media. And you also focus on humanitarian crises and providing life-saving information, as well as also enacting responses to increasingly complex humanitarian crises. So who better than you to help us answer the question, is information a public good? Please
well,
go
I
ahead.
think if it wasn't clear to begin with, this past year certainly made it so. COVID, I think, has helped the whole world really understand the importance of reliable information about crises. And it was mentioned before, I think research has found at least 800 people died around the world because of misinformation in the first few months of the pandemic. Another study found that almost 6,000 people were admitted to hospital around the world because of false information on social media. And I think that's really rung home for people. But in our work at the New Humanitarian, the stakes are almost always that high. When you're covering humanitarian crises, journalistic information is often a matter of life and death. And we cover some of the most vulnerable people on earth, people who are caught up in conflict, displaced from their homes by disasters, people who are on the run, people who don't have access to safety, to basic services. And in telling their stories, we help contribute to improving the response to people in need around the world. And we do so by informing those working in humanitarian response about the realities on the ground,
right,
so that they can make better decisions. We try to hold accountable governments, the UN, NGOs, and others who are meant to serve people in need. And then we try to raise awareness about these crises more broadly to create an informed global citizenry. And when you look at the impact of some of our reporting, of course, among many other news outlets, it's very hard for me to understand how you could ever argue information is not a public good. Right. Our reporting has prompted new aid programs to help people at the heart of crises. We have forced investigations into sexual abuse of beneficiaries by aid workers. Our journalism has been used by people in the midst of war to push for justice at the International Criminal Court. And speaking of COVID, it has helped people in Yemen, in Tanzania, in Peru, who don't necessarily trust the information coming from their own governments to get, as Stephen was saying, a sense of the real toll of the virus. So if information that helps improve people's lives isn't public good, I don't know what is. And maybe just one last point, Gwen, which is that I think
Go ahead, Rita.
Today, crises are not restricted to certain parts of the world, as maybe a few decades ago we might have perceived them to be. We're all now facing transnational crises of climate change, of migration, pandemics, of course. So the kinds of crises we saw, like COVID-19, are not an isolated event. They're the future. And if we don't understand those crises, we're not going to be able to prevent them, to respond to them, to resolve them. So I think information that helps us make sense of the world around us is now becoming an absolute imperative and certainly a public good. Thanks.
Absolutely. So information definitely a public good in the kind of humanitarian work that you are undertaking. Very important indeed. I'm going to turn now to Anthony Bélanger, who is the Secretary-General of the International Federation of Journalists. And I'm going to ask you, Anthony, you're Secretary-General, obviously, of a massive union representing 500,000 journalists around the world, who are all professionals in the field of information. Now, what do you think, or what is their view on, especially coming from those doing or producing the information themselves, on the key question at stake here today, which is information a public good?
You will speak in French.
I gather.
Bonjour à tous. Je veux profiter de ce moment.
Thank you very much for the floor. And thank you very much, Madam Director General. The security of journalists is really a very fundamental issue. Information is public. It is a right of the citizen, and the right to be correctly informed is in the foreground. We have also a World Charter on the right of information, the right of access to information, and also on the responsibility of journalists, which also embraces several other responsibilities. It is also moral and material security and a form of independence. And we also see that this public good information requires time. It also requires that journalists are equipped that we have a sufficient number of journalists in our community and that we all serve in the right of giving public information and also to allow journalists to fulfill their role at its best and to have the best working conditions, to have media pluralism for the promotion of quality of journalism. And that also makes information a public good. We have to encourage the future of this type of journalism and to open the doors to democracy. Very often we have local journalists who are threatened and finally they all link up to international journalists and we see that many journalists are put in prison. We hear about that once a week. And we have to make sure that they have a good life and that our good journalists are not behind prison bars. So the declaration of Windhoek and our theme of 2021 and Madam Director General of the UNESCO and other dignitaries you see also shows us that information becomes indeed a public good.
Journalists who, of course, directly impacted and what their views on this subject. I'm going to quickly turn to the UN Special Rapporteur for Freedom of Expression, and that is Irene Khan. And I'm going to ask Irene, now that we've had the perspective of a number of media representatives, let's focus on a sort of different perspective, which is one of the citizens and rights holders. Why or how do you think information as a public good is so interconnected to the achievement of the universal human right to freedom of expression?
Thank you very much for asking the question. Now, public good is an economic concept. Human rights is a legal concept.
Right.
It's based on entitlement, a right, an obligation on the other side to respect that right, and accountability for not respecting it. So I think by and freedom of expression, at the heart of freedom, the right to freedom of expression is the right to seek, receive, and impart information and ideas of all kinds, regardless of frontiers in any media. So media freedom is at the heart of freedom of expression. And freedom of expression establishes an obligation to respect, uphold, and promote and protect that right. So it actually strengthens information as a right. The right to information is absolutely fundamental to all other rights. In fact, freedom of expression has been defined as a mega right because it enables a whole set of other rights. If you look at the right to political participation, to vote, to participate in elections, to participate in public affairs, freedom of assembly, of association, the right to protest, the right to criticize, the right to hold those in power to account, all that depends on information.
Right.
On receiving information, being able to share it, being able to look for it. And then, of course, there are cultural rights, right to education, the right to religion. So many other rights are dependent on information. So without information, society would suffer. And that is why international human rights courts have actually seen freedom of expression not only as an individual right, but actually as a social benefit. And that is what makes it so important, I think, that we see this connection between information as a public good and information as a human right. Because information ultimately empowers people to hold those in power to account. And that's the function that journalists often do. We've heard the other panelists talk about how information exposes through journalism. The abuse of power is exposed, corruption is exposed through investigative journalism. During COVID-19, during this pandemic, we've seen how false information has been corrected through journalists, through media freedom. So it's actually a matter of life and death. That's what we've seen during the pandemic. Yes. So I would say it's not just an economic concept, it's a fundamental concept for human empowerment, for human rights, for democracy, for sustainable development.
Absolutely critical. Thank you, Irene. And yes, we, in this part of the world, we also talk about access to information as the mother of all rights, because everything stems from that as well. I'm going to turn now to Gloria de la Fuente Gonzalez, who is the Chile Information Commissioner, and to ask her, also looking still at the side of the citizens, one of the corollaries of freedom of expression, that is the universal right to access to information, as I've just mentioned, or access to public information more specifically. Why do you think, or why do you believe that public good, or that the access to information held by public bodies is so important to guaranteeing welfare? Why is it so important we access that information that governments often hold so secretively to themselves?
Of UNESCO and the government of Namibia to participate in this open dialogue about information as public good. A great topic in this moment in the world, in all the world, I think. The Council of Transparency, which is the institution I represent, is a Chilean public and autonomous institution created in the year of 2008, and whose main responsibilities, in accordance with the law of transparency, are promotion of transparency and the public service, guarantee the access of any individual to public information, and to ensure compliance of public institutions of the Chilean Data Protect Act. That is an important thing because the Press Freedom Day, which we proudly celebrate every May 3rd, remind us that alongside the Windhoek Declaration for Development of the Free, Independent and Pluralistic Press, about the importance of freedom of press and information in our democracies and the human rights in general. In this scenario, and answer your question when, it reminds us about the relevance of the building robust mechanisms that ensure information, including public information, be transmitted and distributed freely and effectively between society, enhancing the public welfare via the promotion of transparency and allowing citizens to be informed effectively about their institutions, governments, and news that affect them of the public interest. Only by obtaining this public information, citizens will be fully equipped to exercise these rights effectively and timely. In addition to this, I would like to take the opportunity to highlight that freedom of press and information have a critical issues to be discussed deeply under the current circumstances, such as the relationship between freedom of press and the new technological development, the perils faced by local new media, the threat produced by the concentration of the news media in the hands of a few multinational corporations, and the proliferation of fake news, as my colleague said before. All of which, in addition to the right to access to public information, are of the utmost importance for the robustness of our democracies, and therefore must be taken into account by government around the world. Thank you, Gwen.
Thank you. And of course, an informed citizenry is so crucial to democratic governance and also to achieving that knowledge-based societies that we would really like to see in many, many parts of the world. Thank you, Gloria. To Julia Owana. Julia is from Internet Sans Frontières, and she is also a member of the Facebook Oversight Board. So I'm going to ask Julie, because this is obviously a very critical area of interest for many people, journalists included, of course, to her as an activist in the field of promoting unrestricted internet access to all, and of course tackling the digital divide at the same time, which is so prolific in our part of the world in particular. What do you think this free flow of digital information means to the global south?
Thank you, and thanks to UNESCO and to the Director General for the invitation. I would say the free access to a free flow digital information has a lot of positive, not only for the global south, but I think for the whole humanity. First of all, having access to more information means more democracy. It seems very difficult to believe it at the time, right now, but it is true. The more people have access to information, the more they have access to knowledge, and the more they can hold leaders accountable.
Right.
I think it's also positive in terms of equality. We're talking about the global south here. I think digital information and the internet in general has proved to be a strong force for equality and giving everybody a seat at the table, no matter what you look like, no matter where you come from, no matter your age. And last but not least, I think it has, in whole, a very positive role to play to bring humanity closer together. This is a very great proof of what I'm just trying to demonstrate. We're all gathered here from every part of the world, of around the world, and discussing an extremely important issue related to preserving freedom of the press and freedom of expression in general. But these positive aspects come with challenges. And I would even say all of these positives are only possible if we tackle these challenges. And for me, those challenges can be summed up in just one sentence. How can we make sure that we are having an internet, digital platforms, a digital news ecosystem that is built with human rights by design? What does it mean being built by human rights by design? It means, first of all, not suppressing that freedom of expression, even in the name of fighting disinformation. I think it's extremely important to know that and to remember that, because we tend to forget, faced with the emergency of fighting fake news. The second meaning of building an internet and digital ecosystem for information, human rights by design, it means not shutting down access to the internet because people have access to more knowledge. We are currently seeing a lot of organizations fighting, including Internet Sans Frontières, fighting governments who voluntarily decide to cut themselves from the international bandwidth, precisely because people and journalists and the society as a whole has more access to knowledge thanks to the digital. And last but not least, I think building an information ecosystem that's built by human rights by design means also fighting for gender equality and fighting any other inequalities in access. One of the panelists, or one of the moderators, can't remember, was mentioning the extreme abuse that is being faced by female journalists online. And I would extend in saying that many women citizens in the world are abused online to the extent that it prevents them from freely expressing, from freely accessing knowledge online. I think these challenges, if we tackle them, we can definitely have a way more positive impact of digital ecosystem and internet in general on our society and our world. Thank you.
Right, and thank you very much, Julie, for mentioning the issue of violence against women online, which is obviously a really huge problem that we're having to deal with, and I know will form a part of discussions at this conference. Now, I'm keeping a very close eye on time because we don't want to be late for the Guillermo Kano Award. At the same time, I'd like to keep the panelists as long as I can. Julie, maybe could I just start with you, and I'm going to work my way backwards, if I may. Obviously, we mentioned, you remember, Facebook's oversight board. Now, everybody's watching, I think, very anxiously to see, is this going to be some kind of solution to a more accountable and transparent internet companies. Can you give me perhaps just one line or two lines, just to give us an idea of the work ahead and whether you think this is doable?
I think it's doable. The Facebook oversight work will not obviously solve everything, but what we hope to achieve and what we will achieve, I know that, is to bring principled solutions, human rights-based solutions, to helping platforms moderate the content. They need to do that, but moderate it in a way that's respectful of freedom of expression and human rights in general. Something that, unfortunately, we haven't seen in many of the solutions that have been put forward, especially by many governments. That's my hope.
Thank you, Julie. We look forward to seeing how this plays out. Gloria, if I may turn to you and ask you, and it's a very big question, but I really want a couple of words in reply from you. And, but I think it's very, very important. How or what are the ways in which citizens can or should be made aware of the importance of information for them? And as you know, we're never quite sure whether citizens consider this a matter of huge importance. But how does one get this message across? If I could ask you very briefly to answer, that would be great. Gloria? We've lost Gloria, I think. She muted. Okay, maybe Irene, if you can hear me, I just want to ask you, and I think because we're going to have to wrap up fairly soon, I'm quite keen for the panel just to basically each of you give me three words. Oh, do we have Gloria?
I hear now.
Thank you, Gloria. Yes, please go ahead.
I start again. Sorry.
Okay. Gloria,
okay.
just you got the question.
Yes, I hear the
Super.
question. Yes. Thank you. But first, we have to understand that even though the right of access to public information constitutes a right that pertains to every citizen, its exercises also allows guaranteeing the exercises of other fundamental rights, considering that the access to information permits citizens to know their rights and how they can enforce them. This is particularly attributed to the right to access public information that is extremely valuable,
right,
letting individuals know better their rights and the mechanisms by which they can exercise them. Furthermore, public institutions and government authorities have a critical role in informing the citizens about the importance of obtaining public information and the legal mechanisms available to exercise these associated rights. This information must be provided through different means and in clear and concise fashion in order to be able to reach and the population and not only those, for example, that use a specific social network. Additionally, I would like to point out that is equality critical for this purpose that citizens express interest in being duly informed about these topics, making their authorities accountable for their public works, and actively participating in the public life and life decisions. Finally, I would like to provide you with a brief context about Chile in this regard, when freedom of press and information currently protected by three main legal instruments: the Chilean Constitution, the law of freedom of opinion and information and exercise of journalists, and the transparency and access to information. In the case of Chile, first to promote the right of access to information must duly inform citizens about this key regulatory framework and how to use it, but always in a way which can be understood by all. That is my answer, Gwen.
Thank you very much. As I say, I'd love to let this conversation continue a lot longer, and I'm sure our audience would be keen, but I've got a very strict time constraint. Could I end by asking each of the panelists to either give one summary line of what they think is most critical about the subject of that we're talking about, or else to give us three key words or requisites that they think are necessary for ensuring information as a public good. May I start with you, Irene?
Well, let me just give you a few words. First, protect journalists. Governments have a duty to protect journalists. Only 1 in 10 killings of journalists are investigated.
Right.
And that means killing is used as a means of censorship. Chills others, and of course muzzles those who speak out. Second, stop criminalizing journalism. Maria Ressa of Rappler has enough charges against her to put her in prison for 100 years, all for just doing her job. Thirdly, please don't use misinformation and disinformation as means of stifling freedom of speech, as an excuse for further criminalizing free speech. Disinformation, misinformation should be managed within the framework of human rights. And then I would say, and I'm going to be very short here now, the political tone. Political leaders should stop smearing journalists for doing their job, because that creates a dangerous situation for information as a public good. You do not poison water supply, which is a public good. And then I think on the side of the companies, they need to be transparent, they need to respect human rights, but all sides, companies, governments, and journalists themselves too, because I think they need to take some responsibility here of rebuilding public trust in information. At the moment, a lot of people do not know what is true and what is false and what to trust and what not to trust. And to some extent, journalists also need to improve the quality of their work. There is quality journalism, but there is also a lot that is not. So they also need to play this part of rebuilding public trust.
Thank you very much, Irene. Some very succinct points there. Can I turn to Anthony and ask for some brief, as I say, just a few lines on those requisites for ensuring that information is a public good? Anthony.
Il y a un an, la Fédération internationale des...
A year ago, the International Association of Journalists published an article, and I agree with what was said in it. We have to publish a set of immediate measures allowing our unions to also be defended, because very often our young and freelance journalists are in danger. We have also seen that journalists are pushed aside. We cannot allow that. And I speak in this context about the media desert. We should not close up against one another. We should also see to it that we have no disinformation, and closing up very often leads to that. And we also see in the United States that journalists, especially freelance journalists working alone, are paid in dollars. And the future of journalism and our unions and our militants who are struggling every day on the ground to have valuable information. We also said in those last months that a tax on the benefits of large media companies should be introduced, and that we should distribute those fiscal incomes to grassroots journalists.
Of what you think is most critical for everyone to know about this topic, and or 3 requisites for ensuring information as a public good. And I'm sure you'd say good journalism is one of those.
You're right, Gwen. It's exactly what I would say. Good journalism is fundamental to it all. And there's not really much I can add because I think all the critical points have been said. We are at a time especially with legacy journalism, at a very difficult time in how to transition our businesses, and some are being successful. In fact, there are a lot of very heartening examples of that transition. But we should also remember that in America, just this year, 36,000 journalists have lost their jobs, and that's been reflected all over the world. One thing that Joseph Stiglitz said, and I agree with everything he said, about the transition of how the media industry is transitioning its business. One thing he didn't talk about, though, was how dangerous it is to do journalism in so many parts of the world, and the autocratic regimes making it lethal in many examples to do journalism around the world. So what I would say is that invest in the journalism and technology is vital to this transition. And working with the platforms and technologists to help transform new models. It's not binary. There are lots of different ways that we need to support journalism, whether it's through investigative reporting coalitions, whether it's through tax, whether it's through membership models, etc. There are numerous examples.
Thank you so much, Stephen.
Thank you.
Hebe, could I ask or pose the same question to you, please? Hebe?
Oh, sorry, I didn't hear it was for me. I would echo that in the sense that I think Joseph Stiglitz mentioned public goods should be publicly supported, and that's my main message. I think if we consider journalism a public good, it needs the same kind of public investment as healthcare, as education, as any of the other areas that our governments invest in. And I know that that's historically been an area of skepticism, particularly in the media industry, to accept government financing. So I thought I'd just share a little bit about our business model, because we are funded by both governments and foundations. And we receive funding from aid departments of many governments around the world who use our reporting to inform their own decision-making about how they can best respond to people in need around the world. Never once in 5 years since we left the UN and became independent has a government tried to influence our coverage. And we put in place the same kinds of firewalls as commercial newsrooms do with their advertisers. So that's one model that I think has some promise and needs further and deeper exploration. And I would just say that the nonprofit model is really proving to be, in some cases, more resilient than for-profits. And we've come out of COVID, which, as Stephen mentioned, has been catastrophic for many news organizations, stronger than we went into it, in part because we are a nonprofit. We are specialized in our focus. We're public service oriented in our mandate. We have a closer relationship with our readers, and we aim to fill the gaps left by the mainstream media. And I think there's an increasing demand for that kind of journalism, but it needs the right support. And we have seen many, I work obviously in international news, we've seen many news outlets that were nonprofits, that were independent, and trying to fill that gap and cover international issues in depth have disappeared recently as a result of the financial challenges they're facing. We're seeing the rise now of investments in nonprofit journalism, particularly in the US. I'm hoping that our success can be some impetus for that nonprofit model. Comes down to, if we recognize that information is a public good, governments, philanthropists, readers need to be ready to financially support it.
Thank you very much for that, Hebe. And also just to say that, of course, one thing we didn't really have time to touch on is the critical issue of public trust and what a difference kinds of journalism could make to reinvigorating that, so to speak. So, Gloria, I'm going to give you, I think it will be the second last word, because once you're done, we're going to turn to a video, quick video from Delphine Ernot, who was not able to join us online. So, Gloria, could I give you the last word, your last thoughts on the subject of information as a public good and how we can get this right?
The recent events, I think, around the world associated with the coronavirus pandemic have produced a situation in which it's critical for citizens to make precise judgment about the country reality, shape public opinion, and hold their authorities accountable for their performance. Requirements that are essential for maintaining trust in the institutions and the democratic regime in general. From my point of view, in order to be able to reach these goals, the expansion and strengthening of the right to access public information at the national and international level are necessary. For this, particularly important the work done at multilateral level and international fora such as UNESCO, ACIC, or at regional levels, such as our experience in RTA. We need to continue having your permanent support and work together, I think. From this perspective, our goal is to keep promoting and expanding the right to access information in Chile and collaborate in the world about that, with the objective to build a robust transparency and integrity ecosystem. Ecosystem is a good word in this thing. Prepared to the deal with the big challenge, I think, of the future.
Thank you.
For humanity.
Jovial,
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think I left out Jovial. Can I get a very quick 3 words from you, Jovial?
Yeah, I think quickly, thanks, and I agree with all the words from our panelists, but I think the most important point to reiterate is that information belongs to the people, and that governments simply holds information in the name of the people, and that people have a right to access that information, and that information can be anything from a birth certificate or a contract for a road construction to studies that underpin public policy. It's also very important to reiterate, in our view, that we need great journalism to hold governments accountable and to force them to be transparent. But in order to do so, journalism needs to be funded, and the media needs to be viable. And to be able to survive and to thrive in these tough economic conditions, we cannot continue to do things as we have done in the past. So it has to be business unusual. I think it's very important for us to look at new ways of funding journalism. It's very important for journalists to become entrepreneurial so that they can strike the balance between viability and media freedom. There needs to be a push for journalist-owned and community-owned media. And perhaps here, this is where the international funding community can assist with seed funding. And I say international because there are very few local funders with no strings attached, even if some of them claim to be so. And lastly, partnerships, and news sharing between various media outlets in countries can also lessen the burden of reliance on international agencies, especially in our continents where these agencies tend to concentrate on hard-hitting developments of troubles to the visual exclusion of soft news of developments. Media that will survive will be media whose costs of operations are less costly, and these partnerships, locally, regionally, nationally, and continental, are the ones that, in our view, are going to reduce costs, but also ensure relevant, wholesome information that gives the full picture of problems and progress to the African media consuming community. And
Jovial,
we are saying that we are celebrating the achievements of the 1991 generation of journalists. It is very important for all of us to remember that even the freedoms that have been achieved as a result of the great work done since 1991, even those freedoms need to be defended. So we all need to remain vigilant for the next 30 years plus. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jovial, and a very big thanks to all the panelists. I so wish we had more time to dig deeper and get some of your fascinating opinions coming from all kinds of perspectives. I'd like to ask our real audience here in the room tonight to give our online panelists a very big hand. Thank you, guys, very much indeed. Thank you all. And as we close, I'd like them to play a quick feedback from Delphine Ernotte, who is President of the European Broadcasting Union, Director-General of France Television, She sends an intervention speaking of the crisis in public service broadcasting. She was not able to join us online today. Could we just play out with that video? And again, thank you to our audience here and our online audience for going through this panel with us. I think it was fascinating. Thanks a lot.
Chers amis, au siècle dernier, l'écrivain et homme politique.
During the last century, we also had to look at how we can see one another better, how we can have a clear voice in all the trouble we have to reflect and go through. We also have to look out for people with good intentions and who are shining candles. We had censorship, we had manipulation, disinformation, false propaganda. And that is where we all together have to form a very solid foundation, and that we can also face difficult situations and earn gratitude. We also have to think about democracy. We know that journalism is also a public service. We have to also see how 14 broadcasters in Europe, Africa, Australia, America were frustrated about non-adherence to our primary priorities. We have to count on media values. First of all, the media need to be independent and strong. And also in the Washington Post, Martin Barron spoke about very difficult careers, and that people always say news is what matters most. We also have to see what are our main values: accessibility, precision, creativity, impartiality, independence, and also journalistic strength. We have 40,000 journalists online, and we know that their role is crucial for daily life. And we have seen it even more during the pandemic. We also have to look at information sources and viable information sources. We also have to collect our opinions, our contributions, understanding in the public, and coming from all orientations and origins. And we have to fight against disinformation. We have to identify first what are fake news and educate the public through the media. We also have to put our articles in the windows of newspapers and the media. We have to be independent, pluralistic, and facilitate exchange. We also have to make journalists responsible for their acts in the world. We have media specialists which are well financed. We also have democratic media circles which function well. We also have real threats for the media. And very often the media try to benefit from the pandemic, and very often also saw a weakening of the media role in all that. So how do we progress? We have to make contributions to media independence. 80% are waiting for financing because they are feeling the impact of the pandemic. We have industrial cultures. We also need together look at the 20 billion euros which are available and spent for broadcasting in Europe and in the United States. We also have to look at the elements of it. We see an explosion of fees, and we also have barriers. We have to contribute and to remunerate. We have to look at our networks and how we adapt ourselves to the future. The Windhoek Declaration is looking at a free journalism and also which role the public media play in this, and that they are successful, that they have a sustainable financing, and we also should be free from political interference. We applaud the efforts made by UNESCO. We appreciate it, and see you soon.
In times of emergency, and at every critical time, there's always someone that brings you credible information to ensure accountability and expose the truth. It takes independence.
У нас все равно уже существует дозированное право на получение и распространение информации.
It takes courage.
عمليات الإبادة، جرائم الحرب، جرائم التعذيب تحاول أن تلبس لبوس قانوني.
It takes tenacity to bring you a reliable story. Despite repression, despite threats.
They filmed me secretly in my bedroom with my boyfriend and then blackmailed me with that video.
Despite persecution.
Reuters reporters Wallone and Yasu'u leaving court today after a Myanmar judge found them guilty.
Despite censorship. Journalists put the truth first, sometimes at the risk of their own lives. In recognition of their commitment, we honor them.
When people don't know what is real and what is fake, when facts don't matter, then the voice with the loudest megaphone gains more power.
I got an average of 90 hate messages per hour. And per hour, imagine getting 90 hate messages per hour.
I think what we've learned in Rappler is that now, more than ever, the mission, the reason why we became journalists in the first place, that mission is more important to our societies than ever. We are in an active battle to preserve our democracy. Democracies live in a public sphere where we all have to agree on the facts. This weaponization of social media actually uses free speech to incite hate against perceived enemies or critics of the state. Don't let it happen. We have to keep fighting back.
that. Everybody can hear me. And now, of course, we come to the real highlight of our program today, and that is, of course, the Guillermo Kano Award ceremony. And lovely to see Maria, our prize winner, there as usual. And this is the part, I think, of the program where we really celebrate good journalism and good journalists, many of whom have made very great sacrifices in the course of their work or for doing their job and for obviously performing public service on behalf of the people. So again, good evening to everybody here this late afternoon in Namibia. I'd like to again acknowledge the Right Honourable Prime Minister, Sarah Kukangelwa Amadila, and of course our UNESCO Director-General, Audrey Azoulay, other excellencies in the room, including, I see a speaker of our parliament, Professor Peter Kachivivi was here. I saw Yvonne Dausab, thank you, Peter. Yvonne Dausab, our Justice Minister earlier, so I can't identify the others with masks, but welcome to you all. If I have not mentioned you, please, you are very welcome to this event. Again, I have great pleasure in welcoming you back to the plenary hall. It's an honor to have everybody here, both online and, of course, in person, for these awards. So I'm going to now hand over the floor to Zoe Titus. Zoe is the director of the Namibia Media Trust, and she's going to be your master of ceremony for this award ceremony. But before I do so, allow me to throw my objectivity to the winds for a little bit, and just to say what absolutely sterling work Zoe is doing in furthering the goals of press freedom, freedom of expression, and access to information here in Namibia and further afield. And of course, the NMT is also a very proud sponsor of the Guillermo Kano Award. So without further ado, I'm going to leave the podium and I'm going to hand you over to Zoe to take it from here. Thank you so much, everybody, for being here.
Thank you very much for that introduction, Gwen. I would also like to extend a warm welcome to everyone, but before I do that, I'm handing the floor to a musical genius in my eyes, young and upcoming saxophonist Susie ISS, to officially start off this award ceremony. Thank you much, Susie, for that intervention. We had to start with music. It is a celebration after all. So again, I would like to extend a very warm welcome to everyone. It is such an honor for me to be guiding you through the ceremony tonight. Also because the organization that I lead, the Namibia Media Trust, has been a co-sponsor of this award since 2018. But let's start with a video message from Ana Maria Busquet de Kano, the president of the Guillermo Kano Isaza Foundation and widow of Guillermo Kano, who was the journalist in honor of which this award is named, a journalist who was assassinated in front of the offices of his newspaper, El Espectador, in Bogota, Colombia, on 17 December 1986.
Que las circunstancias que nos afectan a todos me impidan asistir al homenaje que se rinde hoy a una mujer empeñada en defender, proteger y enaltecer la libertad de prensa en el mundo. Así lo hizo Guillermo Kano durante toda su vida, tal como se solicitó en el Seminario de las Naciones Unidas en Windhoek, Namibia, el 3 de mayo de 1991. Me hubiera gustado mucho entregarlo personalmente el premio a María Reza y decirle cuánto admiramos su labor y su empeño, y a los periodistas africanos que promovieron la creación de un premio a la prensa libre y pluralista hace 30 años. Premio que desde entonces ha enaltecido el difícil oficio de contar al mundo lo que sucede.
Speaking Spanish. No, Spanish. Yeah. Put it back.
Abrazo solidario a todos los periodistas que asisten al seminario que empieza hoy.
Thank you very much, Ms. Kano. This prize, of course, would not exist without the sponsorship of the Kano Foundation, in addition to the Namibia Media Trust. Other sponsors include the Helsinki Sanomat Foundation and the Democracy and Media Foundation. But let's get to the business of this evening. Allow me now to ask the members of the independent international jury of the UNESCO Guillermo Kano Prize to come on stage, while we also have connected from UNESCO headquarters in Paris, Mr. Xing Chu, Deputy Director General and Acting Assistant Director General for Communication and Information. So join me in welcoming the President of the UNESCO Guillermo Kano Jury, Marilu Mastro Giovanni, reporter and founder and director of El Taco d'Italia from Italy, and member of the international jury, David Dembele, editor-in-chief of Dépêche du Mali. And now we'll also connect with Manila in the Philippines. Can Maria hear us? There she is. Thank you so much for joining, and I hand over the floor now to the President and representative of the jury. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair. Prime Minister, UNESCO Director-General, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, the annual UNESCO Guillermo Kano World Press Freedom Prize honors a person, organization, or institution that has made an outstanding contribution to the defense and/or promotion of press freedom anywhere in the world, and especially when this has been achieved in the face of danger. As too many journalists are unfortunately treated today in the world, we have received many relevant nominees, for which we want to thank all those organizations and entities that submitted candidatures governments, UNESCO national commissions, as well as international and regional professional and non-governmental organizations active in the field of journalism and freedom of expression. On behalf of the international jury members, composed by Wendy Funes, investigative journalist from Honduras, Hamid Mir, executive editor of Geo Television, Pakistan, Alfred Lela, founder and director of Politico.al in Albania, Zainab Salbi, journalist and TV host from Iraq, and my colleague David Denbele, next to me, from Mali, of the Malian Network of Investigative Journalists. We have recommended Ms. Maria Ressa from Philippines be the laureate of the 2021 UNESCO Guillermo Kano World Press Freedom Prize for the following reasons. Over to you, dear David.
Okay, he allowed me to do it in French. Bonsoir, mesdames et messieurs. Alors,
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Maria Reda, the chief editor. We would also like to mention that her fight for the freedom of expression deserves to be recognized, and also in the Philippines and everywhere in the world. The security framework is still fragile, and she was condemned after a case of cybercrime for defamation, and Maria Teresa has to face 8 accusations, and she is at risk to spend the rest of her life in prison, and that she will be judged culpable. We also have a lot of violence online against journalists, and also a lot of negative impact on media platforms.
Is emblematic of the growing phenomenon of arbitrary, abusive judicial prosecution and the so-called strategic lawsuit against public participation, SLAP. The case of Maria Ressa is emblematic of this global trend, which represents a real threat to press freedom and therefore to democracy.
Alors, malgré les persécutions et
despite the prosecution and also the trouble to which her life is exposed, she resists and is serving as a model for the journalists of her country and everywhere in the world.
By awarding Maria Ressa, UNESCO would bring the spotlight on such concern, as well as encourage and sensitize states to take ad hoc measures to counter SLAP and online harassment against journalists, with particular reference to the one affecting women journalists.
Thank you very much, Ms. Mastro Giovanni and Mr. Dembella. I will now give the floor to UNESCO's Assistant Director General for Communication and Information, Jing Chu, who is connecting online.
Thank you, Chair. You hear me?
Do you hear me? Thank you, Chair. Do you hear me?
We can hear you. We can hear you.
very
Please
good.
proceed.
Thank you. So, Prime Minister, Director General, Excellencies, members of the International Jury, ladies and gentlemen, greetings from UNESCO headquarters in Paris. I would like to start by thanking the President of the Guillermo Kano Foundation for her participation. I would also like to sincerely thank Ms. Ana Maria Bosque de Kano for her tireless efforts to keep alive the memory of her husband, Guillermo Kano, the brilliant editor from El Espectador, who fought against the corruption of the drug cartels in his country and paid the highest price for the search of the truth and the exercise of press freedom. I also like to express my heartfelt gratitude to the sponsors of the prize. They are Democracy and Media Foundation, Stitched in Democracy and Media, the Helsinki Sanomat Foundation, and the Namibia Media Trust, whose Executive Director, Ms. Zoe Titus, is moderating today's ceremony. Thank you very much to Ms. Mastro Giovanni, the President of the International Jury, and to Mr. Dembele, member of the Independent Jury, for having so well articulated the justification for this year's choice. Please convey my regards to all members of the jury. At a critical time for humanity, the need has been never stronger for professionals committed to reporting the news. With a career spanning over 30 years, this year's laureate has dedicated her life to practicing press freedom. Throughout your career, Ms. Ressa, you have embodied the courage and commitment of independent journalism in the face of countless threats and relentless pressures. Despite being the target of vicious online attacks, you have remained committed to holding the line and fighting back violence and harassment against the journalists. Your integrity, dedication, and professionalism are of inspiration to many across the globe to continue the fight for facts and to take a stand for the values and principles of free, independent, and pluralistic journalism. Ms. Ressa, in my capacity as Acting Assistant Director General for Communication and Information of UNESCO, I am extremely honored to virtually deliver the 2021 UNESCO Guillermo Kano World Press Freedom Award to you. This delivery is symbolized by this diploma, which I am now holding in my hand and will be sent to you together with the awarded amount of $25,000 US. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, please join me in expressing our warmest congratulations to the 2021 winner, Ms. Maria Ressa, with a big round of applause in presential and virtually. Very much. Linda Hawk, back to you.
Thank you very much, Deputy Director General. And the moment you've all been waiting for, I'm sure, to hear from the winner of the 2021 UNESCO Guillermo Kano World Press Freedom Award. It is my honor to introduce Maria Ressa.
Thank you so much to UNESCO, the independent jury, the more than 80 press freedom and news organizations who've helped us hold the line.
This is for Rappler and all Filipino journalists who, despite the increased risks just to be able to do our jobs, continue to hold power to account. It's also a reflection of how the world looks at the Duterte administration today and the death by 1,000 cuts of our democracy happening in front of your eyes. I wish I were with you today in Namibia, but I'm in Manila, prevented from traveling by court order, which I continue to fight as state-led legal attacks are waged against me on multiple fronts. I also can't travel because my nation is suffering the consequences of putting retired military generals in charge of a public health crisis, when political patronage and loyalty, not competence, is the metric of power. This is a time when lies and incompetence kill. In less than 2 years, the Philippine government filed 10 arrest warrants against me. In 2017, government propagandists tried to trend the hashtag Arrest Maria Ressa. They failed, but they kept at it, and 2 years later, I was arrested twice in a little more than a month. They violated my rights when they prevented me from posting bail and detained me overnight. I suppose they wanted me to shake and feel their power. To the budding dictators of this world, if you have to abuse your power to make you feel powerful, you're not powerful, just abusive and small. What I and other truth tellers in the Philippines have lived through has given us firsthand experience of how the law and law enforcement have been turned against our people. Now more than ever, power and money rule. In 2016, 4 months after Duterte became president, Rappler and I wrote investigative pieces showing you how the first casualty in our nation's battle for truth is the number of people killed in our brutal drug war. That violence was facilitated, fueled by American social media companies. Based on big data analysis, we reported the networks that were manipulating us online, targeting and attacking truth tellers, pounding to silence anyone challenging power, which created an extensive social media propaganda machine. 5 years ago, we demanded an end to impunity on 2 fronts: Duterte's drug war and Mark Zuckerberg's Facebook. Today, it has only gotten worse. And Silicon Valley sins came home to roost on January 6th with mob violence on Capitol Hill. What happens on social media doesn't stay on social media. Online violence leads to real-world violence. Since 2016, I've felt like Sisyphus and Cassandra combined, repeatedly warning that our dystopian present is your future. American biologist E.O. Wilson said it best: we're facing Paleolithic emotions, medieval institutions, and godlike technology. Social media, with its highly profitable micro-targeting, has become a behavior modification system, and we are Pavlov's dogs, experimented on in real time with disastrous consequences. Facebook is the world's largest distributor of news, and yet studies have shown that lies laced with anger and hate spread faster and further than really boring facts. The social media platforms that deliver the facts to you are biased against facts, biased against journalists, biased against meaningful conversations. They are, by design, dividing us and radicalizing us. This is not a free speech issue. It's not the fault of its users. These platforms are not merely mirroring humanity. They're making all of us our worst selves, creating emergent behavior that feeds on violence, fear, uncertainty, and enabling the rise of fascism. Think of it like this: without facts, you can't have truth. Without truth, you can't have trust. Without trust, we have no shared reality, and it becomes impossible to deal with our world's existential problems: the coronavirus, climate, the atom bomb that exploded in our information ecosystem when journalists lost gatekeeping powers to technology companies. Tech abdicated responsibility for the public sphere and couldn't seem to fathom that information is a public good. Women, people of color, the LGBTQ, those already marginalized, become even more vulnerable, as you'll see in the UNESCO report, The Chilling, whose lead author, ICFJ's Julie Passetti, convinced me to speak up when my attacks began many years ago. Of course, there's a cost to speaking truth to power. On Christmas Eve, 2 years ago, Amal Clooney sent me an email. Until then, no one had really had the time to go through the many ludicrous charges I'm facing and their penalties. Turns out, I could go to jail for the rest of my life. By her last count on paper, it was more than 100 years in prison. So I dealt with the sinking feeling in my stomach. This is my lawyer telling me that, right? I took away a lesson. Don't open an email from Amal on Christmas Eve. Sometimes you just have to laugh. Believe it or not, I'm lucky. When you're the target of attacks, you're the only one who sees it all. But you can also see exactly how the tactics change. Knowledge is power. And because I spent 2 decades of my career outside the Philippines, the international community knows me, the quality of my work, my values, my work ethic. So many others aren't so lucky. Like 35-year-old Richie Nepomuceno, who accused the police of extortion, torture, and rape. She was one of at least 3 Filipino women who filed charges against 11 policemen who they said held them inside a secret room at a police station. Less than 2 weeks ago, on April 19, Richie was walking down the street when she was shot and killed. Human rights activist Sara Alvarez and another colleague were set to testify against the government and the military. She went as far as asking for court protection, which was at first denied and is still on appeal. Last August, she was walking home with her dinner. She had just bought it when she was shot and killed. So was her colleague. No one is left to testify. I could go on. Now let's go to the journalists. Frenchie May Cumpio, still in jail, celebrated her 22nd birthday in prison. Arrested and jailed more than a year ago, it is a familiar tactic. You get an arrest warrant, do a raid, then charged with possession of illegal firearms and explosives, a non-bailable offense. That's also what happened to Lady Anne Salem, another young journalist. Arrested last December, Salem said the police planted evidence in her apartment, but another judge voided her arrest warrant. It still took time before she was released, forcing her to spend 3 months in prison during a pandemic because she's a journalist. It's not a coincidence that these victims are women. This February, Senator Lyla De Lima, whom Amnesty International calls a prisoner of conscience, began her 5th year in prison. She calls it lawfare, when law is used as a weapon to silence anyone questioning power. The cuts to democracy are bleeding. They're overwhelming and can't be ignored. Last year, just 2 days after World Press Freedom Day, Filipino lawmakers, nudged by President Duterte, shut down ABS-CBN, once our largest broadcasting network, our largest news group, also headed by a female journalist. Thousands lost their jobs. Around the same time that Hong Kong passed its draconian security law, the Philippines passed an anti-terror law that sparked 37 petitions at the Supreme Court to declare it unconstitutional. Under that law, anyone some cabinet secretaries call a terrorist could be arrested without a warrant and jailed for up to 24 days. Here's one last fact. More lawyers have died under the Duterte administration than in the 44 years before he took office. So here's the thing. Our problems can't be solved from the Philippines alone. Again, something I've said repeatedly. What's local is global, and what's global is local. As we face the coronavirus, there's an equally dangerous and insidious virus of lies unleashed in our information ecosystem. It's seeded by power, wanting to stay in power, spread by algorithms, motivated, created for profit, a business model Shoshana Zuboff calls surveillance capitalism. The reward is your attention, and all this is linked to geopolitical power play. Last week, the EU slammed Russia and China for their intensified vaccine disinformation campaigns. Last September, Facebook took down information operations from China that were campaigning for the daughter of Duterte for president next year, our presidential elections. That network was creating fake accounts for US elections, and it was attacking me. The virus of lies is highly contagious. They infect real people who become impervious to facts. It changes the way they look at the world. They become angrier, more isolated. They distrust everything. In this environment, the dictator wins, crumbling our democracies from within. I became a journalist 35 years ago when people power in the Philippines helped spark democracy movements around the world. I had the great privilege of reporting on much of Southeast Asia's transition from one-man authoritarian rule to democracy. There's this one moment when power and money chooses status quo or change. In the Philippines in 1986, there was an elite family's banner at a protest rally that helped open the floodgates that hosted a dictator. In Indonesia in 1998, months of student protests led nowhere until the business community and the military stepped in, ending nearly 32 years of Suharto. Those with power and money must choose. Ask yourselves these questions. Who are you? What do you stand for? What kind of world do you want in the next decade? The more you have, the more you must risk, because silence is complicity. Whether you're at the UN or heading a nation or a corporation, or you're a politician, human rights worker, a journalist, or a citizen, fight and win your individual battle for integrity. At stake is our collective global future. Please act now. Courage on. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Maria. You truly are an inspiration to journalists all over the world. Continue to hold the line. I hope that you won't leave us. Is she still online? May I ask the Prime Minister and the DG to come to the podium for a photo opportunity with Maria, if you don't mind? Oh, the screen. On my left. I'm getting the instructions. To my left, please. Here she is. On that side.
Okay, let me just...
Okay. Oops. All right. Yes. And there she is. Congratulations once more, Maria. Please hold on. We don't want to lose you. But now we go into another musical intervention with young violinist Ronaldo Kandume. We will hear a little more from Maria Ressa just after this performance. Maria, I think everything is under control. You can leave us now. We will be playing a shorter video a little later. Thank you. Thank you so much, Ronaldo. And this brings us to the end of this award ceremony, ladies and gentlemen. I leave you with a last word from the winner, Maria Ressa. She is being interviewed here by BBC journalist Sharma Khalil. Thank you, Maria Ressa and Shamai.
Maria, how's it going?
It's going okay. I mean, like everything, right? It feels like this is stretched on for such a long time, but this moment, good.
Well, let's start with congratulations. This is, it's been a tough year for everyone, and I think, very well deserved award, the UNESCO Guillermo Kano World Press Freedom Award for you, whose life work really has been about press freedom. And this is definitely going to be the core of our interview, but I actually want to start with just how are you? I think if the pandemic taught us anything, it's that one question makes a whole lot of difference. So yeah, how's it been?
It's hard to answer, right? I mean, this is actually a good thing for journalists in the Philippines. And I make no mistake, this isn't really about me as much as also the view of the world of the Duterte administration and how tough it is to be a journalist doing what we do. This is my 35th year as a journalist. People power. 1986 was when I became a reporter, and kind of like the euphoria of that, 1986 was when I became a reporter, and kind of like the euphoria of that, that we could do wonderful things, and to be here 35 years later is just heartbreaking. February was the 35th anniversary of the People Power Revolt. So present moment of the past, melancholy, pained because of, we have not only the deaths of the coronavirus, but the brutal deaths of the drug war, the number of people, that's the first casualty in our battle for truth. But I think personally, it's more that this is the 5th year. It's tiring, but at the same time, I just come up for air, and I keep looking for hope. And the hope comes, because I just remember why we do what we do. I think that's the big thing, for me at least. When I came under attack as a journalist, and it kind of makes, still part of me gets uncomfortable when someone calls me an activist or a freedom fighter, because I grew up in an age when I used to fly into countries, tell the story the way I see it, and then come out, and you don't feel the repercussions as much as living in the country, right? So you can say and write and show with very little real fear. Well, this has been the 5th year where I truly have to think of worst case scenarios. In less than 2 years, the Philippine government filed 10 arrest warrants against me. I mean,
oh, it's 10. I got 8. The numbers I have are 8 arrest warrants, 2 arrests, and 1 detention. They may be more.
8 arrest warrants was in 2019.
That's
and
true.
Then in 2020, I got my 9th in November. And then my 10th was January this year. And I haven't done anything differently. I know the standards and ethics. I mean, I wrote the standards and ethics manual for 3 other news groups. And I was with CNN when it grew. One of the biggest things that we dealt with was, I don't know if you even remember Operation Tailwind. That was, I was a young reporter then. So I've watched our industry evolve. And I guess when that's such a tough question. I'm still answering the how are you? I am good, fighting for my rights, both as a citizen and as a journalist. I'm not going to willingly, voluntarily give up my rights.
I think what is fascinating, but also in a way terrifying about the picture that you paint is the amount of things that you're up against. And I'm not just referring to the 10 arrest warrants or the constantly living under a threat of being arrested, but it's also, for your job as a journalist, and I guess it goes for all of us as journalists, trying to tell the story as is, there was always a dichotomy of telling the truth to power,
yes,
presenting a counter narrative. And then social media happened, and that kind of has changed the landscape in a way that we're still dealing with. So I want to bring it to the theme of this year's World Press Freedom Day. The theme of this conference is information as a public good. And yet we live in a world of misinformation, which is the inaccurate falsehoods, but also disinformation, which is the deliberate spread of falsehoods. And I'm just wondering, as a journalist, what you feel you're up against in your daily struggle. Because yes, of course, the people in power, the traditional power, the strong men of your country, my country, our respective countries around the world, but also the other real power, if you will, those behind the big tech companies and what that has done to democracies around the world.
what can I tell you? Thank you for asking that question, but because I think that is what's changed, right? So where do I begin? I've always said,
for you personally, let's begin for you personally, for your job, for what you do on a daily basis.
So, when I was with CNN, I ran our conflict. I ran conflict coverage for most of Southeast Asia. The end of almost all the strongman rulers in Southeast Asia, I covered that. The end of 32 years of Suharto in Indonesia, I was lead of that. East Timor, when really actually it was in Indonesia and then East Timor where journalists became targeted, because during that time, before 1998 or 1999, we could kind of be like the Red Cross and walk into conflict and war zones. And if we told people we were journalists, we were relatively safe and in fact welcomed so that we could tell the story. Well, 98, 99, 2000 into Iraq, that's when we became targets, right? And it's not as dangerous as it is today, because today the target is every day, every minute, with you all the time, and very, very personal. So I think today, I should have shut that off. It's actually turned off.
Don't worry about it.
Look, today, I think it is more dangerous to just be on social media than it was when you would go into a war zone, because when you do that, you know exactly where the shooting is coming from. You plan your contingencies. You know your way in, you know your way out. And very rarely do you get surprised when you're with your team, right? And you're there.
The front lines are clear.
Exactly. You know which side is shooting at which side. And even when it's crazy, like let's say, in Indonesia, in Ambon, religious violence, Muslims versus Christians, and they had checkpoints at every different parts of the block. And what we did was to then have one car with two people who were Christian and another car with two people who were Muslim. And depending on who was in the checkpoint, they would lead and carry through. You could do a plan. And you weren't alone. This time around, the target is the only one who sees all of the threat. And it is massive. It's like having a tsunami come at you. In 2016, when we exposed the propaganda machine on Facebook, I was inundated on a per hour basis with 90 hate messages per hour. That was on an average, because there was a certain point where at the beginning, I was trying to respond. And then at a certain point, nobody was listening, right? Yeah. So this is personal. The threats are visceral. UNESCO, for World Press Freedom Day, came out with a report. Exactly. It's called The Chilling. It's psychological. It plays with your mind for sure. It's mental, and it's physical. So you can see that let me put it this way. The very platforms that deliver the news today are the same platforms that prioritize the spread of hate speech, of lies laced with anger and hate over really boring facts, right? We spend our careers learning how to tell compelling stories built around facts so that people in the public sphere get the information they need, right? But if we just gave people facts, the brain will just reject it and won't care. And you're a good journalist because you know how to tell a good story. Well, think about it as an entire clean slate. It's not about telling a story anymore. It's about telling the most ridiculous, incendiary lies. And the platforms that distribute facts and news will prioritize the spread of that, the reach of that over facts, right? So what's happened? Social media has become a behavior modification system, complete with its micro-targeting. Beyond that, social media also has enabled the rise of these cheap armies that have literally, in plain view, torn our democracies apart. If you look at the top 10 countries where social media delivers the news, it's not a coincidence that they are countries where, except the United States, I think the United States is now after Trump, but they were countries that actually had enabled populist authoritarian style leaders, and many of them use that power to crumble democracy from within with the help of these networks that spread disinformation.
Which I think, you know, begs the eternal two questions when we talk about these things. One is, where do you stand as a journalist in that world right now? Because the power, again, you're up against two very powerful, you know, elements. One is docent power, literal power in any country, who use the other type of power, social media, to then propagate. Where do you stand, and where does the work happen? Because again, the thing is, it's relentless, and it develops and it changes all the time. And what's interesting as well, you know, if you see quotes from Mark Zuckerberg, for example, which is part of Facebook's, you know, ethos is to, you know, help people build communities or bring people together. Well, it's become very obvious that that's not happening. But I want to come back to the role of the journalist in all of this, especially because of the noise.
I actually think so. We were the gatekeepers that protected the public sphere, right? We were accountable for doing that for many, many years. And I would peg 2014 was when it really began to change. And I would look at, you know, what happened in the Ukraine, in Crimea, and kind of the dual realities that were there. And then the rise of instant articles on Facebook, when it enticed news organizations to come into the same system and did not change the algorithms, right? So the very same algorithms that spreads the joke, or, you know, what you had for dinner, are the ones that where news organizations compete. I think you said two things. You know, where do we stand? Look, in 2016, and I really feel I'm so tired of myself because I've been saying this since 2016, right? In 2016, we stood up and said, stop the impunity, and they were two, and you actually pegged both of them. The first is President Duterte and his brutal drug war, the state that is using its power to enable the destruction of our constitution and the death by 1,000 cuts of our democracy, the killings of, according to human rights groups, tens of thousands of people, right? That's one. But the second one was very clear also. The piece that I wrote in 2016, the second title was How Facebook Algorithms Impact Democracy. It's Mark Zuckerberg and Facebook. They have to stop the impunity, because in every country around the world, including the United States, including the UK, including Australia, in every country, you see how these cheap armies have infiltrated our information ecosystem, because the gatekeepers, the new ones who have abdicated responsibility technology, have allowed them in. And it's almost like, as we fight coronavirus in the real world, here's a virus of lies. And when these virus of lies, when RT seeds in August 2019 election fraud, and the same thing goes as a meta-narrative and pops out of President Trump's mouth after, actually right during the presidential elections, November 2020, you know, this is not a coincidence. This is the same kind of methodology that's happening in the Philippines. So here's the upside for me. What do we do as journalists? Well, for me, in 2016, I realized this was something different. You know, that quote from Conrad, Heart of Darkness, it was terrifying when I realized what was really happening. And this was in 2016, and I began to sound the alarm. And I think many of my colleagues, they're probably too nice, you know, but I remember being in News Lab, in Google, in Mountain View, actually saying, what is happening to us is coming for you, right? And then I wrote, I mean, look, I think people were patient. They didn't quite understand it, because you don't get it until you are the target, until you see it, right? So since I became the target, I'm an investigative journalist, and I run our business. I run the business and the tech in Rappler. It actually allowed me to study it. So at a certain point, I learned to take these attacks and kind of take them apart, right? Let natural language processing take care of it, all of the messages, and then look at the networks that were doing it, the recidivist networks, and to actually point them out to Facebook, to bring them to Facebook. And to Facebook's credit, they did 4 takedowns in the Philippines, including the September takedown last year, they took down 2 networks of disinformation. One, which we started sounding the alarm at the beginning of the year, was connected to the Philippine police and the military. And they were targeting journalists, human rights activists, opposition politicians, essentially calling them terrorists. In the Philippines, we call it red tagging, right? So they took that network down. President Duterte threatened them, right? So they felt maybe a little fraction of what journalists feel when we speak truth to power, right? So they maintained it. The second one was even scarier because it came from China. This Chinese information operations was targeting all of Southeast Asia and the United States, but it was most effective in the Philippines. And what was it doing here? It was campaigning for the daughter of President Duterte. We have presidential elections next year. Duterte cannot run again, but apparently his daughter is. That's how we do the Chinese influence operation. It was attacking me and Rappler, and it was also essentially sanitizing the reputation of the daughter of Ferdinand Marcos, Amy Marcos, who's a senator today. The other thing it did was to create fake accounts for the US elections using AI-generated photos, right? That's so, taken down.
So in a way, it sounds to me like you're at Rappler, and correct me if I'm wrong, but you're almost doing 2 parallel things. You're doing the news work, which is to bring news and stories to people. That's a day-to-day, but you're also doing investigation of a different kind. You're doing misinformation and disinformation investigations as well, which is really interesting because you see that happening with so many networks at the moment that they almost feel like they need a misinformation or a conspiracy busting, parallel to all of this, because it just feels like providing information is not enough anymore. It's that this is the truth, but also beware that this is happening. And I'm just wondering, and again, I must confess, it's different because, we consume news differently as journalists, but for the general public, this must be overwhelming, but exhausting as well. What do you do with public fatigue? Especially if you're provided an echo chamber where you hear what you want to hear, frankly.
Yeah, it's a great question. I think first, the way we dealt. So let me talk about the way we dealt with it in Rappler, and then how I saw our public evolve, how I saw the division happen in plain sight, right? So in Rappler, I was executive editor, meaning I was the top of our editorial chain, right? But I held it up until actually November last year. I gave it up for a lot of reasons. One is, it's time. I'm 57 years old. I'm in a different generation, and
don't look at.
That's. I think President Duterte has given me more gray hair. But so the other reason is also because I can't pretend that I don't know that rights are being violated. I can't pretend that I don't know which officials are lying. I can't pretend. And that is part of kind of the shift in thinking, right? In some ways, old power, and I will put journalists in that, right? We still kind of held on to the old world where we expected power, the people we do stories on, to stick to these unwritten rules that we used to have. They don't. Yeah. They don't, right? So to pretend like it is, it's like the climate deniers. And so I think in that sense, I realized I needed to start speaking. And so I don't get offended anymore when I'm called an activist, because guess what? The other thing I realized was that when facts are being debated, when there are alternative visions and they're all facts to people in the same society. I mean, talk about the matrix, right?
Absolutely. Especially in a time of pandemic.
Well, at a time when lies kill, right? But I would say when that happens, then journalism is activism, because the facts are not debatable, right? Whether I'm holding a Coke Zero or not is not debatable. But and this is where you move into group psychology and you walk into emergent behavior, which is what the social media platforms refuse to bring into the discussion. individual people behave differently. We can still exercise free will, right? Of course, that's one of the questions I have right now is with this all the time, can we? But so we exercise free will, but you put us in a small group, we begin to behave differently. And this is like there's so many sociological studies that have shown this. The experiment I remember is that Solomon Asch, where he just, a small group of people come in and they have to choose the shortest line. But the test case is at the end, right? And everyone before him has chosen the longest line, saying it's the shortest. And 75% will follow the group. That's just a small group. Now, think about when you have, what does Facebook have? 3.2 billion or 3.7 if you include.
I was going to say, multiply that by hundreds of millions.
Then you have emergent behavior. And this is what is happening to society. You also add in things like the degrees of separation. In the physical world, we used to have 6 degrees of separation. And that would be the cluster. That would be how fast information can spread, right? These would be social networks. In the virtual world, on social media, that 6 degrees is down to 3.75 on Facebook. It's down to a little bit. Each social media platform has something slightly different, but all significantly lower than what our physical brain and surroundings have enabled, right? So anyway, I guess I'm just saying that that social media platforms are fundamentally changing our behavior.
I just want to pick up on that point, actually. In your work, in your daily work, and in, I would say, the last maybe 4 years, when the real paradigm shift happened, if you will, how did you, in the Philippines, how do you see the behavioral change in the way people get their information? And is it generational?
No. So this is where we really are a petri dish for what is coming your way, because for 6 years in a row now, Filipinos spend the most time online and on social media globally. That's 6 years running, right?
Across the generations.
Across the last 6 years, right? So, and Facebook is essentially, so we have about 109 million population, but about 70% are on the internet. And that 100% of the people on the internet are on Facebook. So Facebook is our internet. And when I met Mark Zuckerberg, I tried to tell him how powerful the platform is, thinking like journalists that he would find that incredible, right? It's very, very humbling to have that much power. Well, I told him at that point, it was something like, 75% of the people on the internet are on Facebook. And I told him that, and he kind of said, no, sorry, it's the other way. So at the point, I told him 97% of the Filipinos on the internet are on Facebook. And he kind of looked at me and he just said, wait, Maria, where are the other 3%?
I knew that's what he was going to look at. Why is it 100%?
Right. Well, now it's 100%. So a year later.
But joking aside, I mean, this kind of power that we talk about, I mean, 100%, it's absolute. Like, no one has that kind of power. And I know we're running out of time. I can talk to you for ages. I have 2 last questions. One is, I'm still taken by what you've described in terms of a war zone, that you've compared social media now to a war zone. And I'm just wondering, looking to the next 5 years, the next challenges, how do you see the future of journalism? If someone is getting into journalism now, what would your advice be? What would their best tools be? And what are they getting into?
I love the question. And you know what? Strangely, I am actually hopeful, because this is that moment of creative destruction. I'll finish answering the last question, which is, I studied this, exactly what was going on social media, how we are being manipulated, because that is my foundation for reality, right? Otherwise, if you don't have the data, if you don't understand how we are being manipulated, how we are being, polarized and radicalized, how the design does that, then you would think that we still live in the old world. That's the first. So how do we deal with it? And this is something that's in the pillars of Rappler, right? Because we're actually building for the future. You have to think that everything we knew is destroyed. Like, this is like after the 9/11 attacks. And I'll go even a step further. It's after the atom bomb exploded at the end of World War II. That is that kind of moment globally, right? And so 3 things for me. and they're the three pillars of Rappler. Solution comes from tech, journalism, and community, right? Technology, the first is to put guardrails on these extremely powerful platforms that should be beyond profit, right? That should be beyond just that motive. Surveillance capitalism is what Shoshana Zuboff called it in her book, right? And the second thing is what we did as a news organization is we rolled out a platform last year. We built our own because, you know, journalists did something not very smart. We didn't understand the technology in 20, I guess, a decade ago when Facebook came out, when Twitter came out, and we outsourced the most powerful part of what we do, which it's not the content, it's the relationships. So every news group that put a Facebook button or a Twitter button out gave that to someone else. Why do we do that, right? So we built a platform.
Well, relevance, I would say.
It's not relevance as much as why didn't we build it ourselves? Why did we, not that, you know, I'm just telling you that I think the future of journalism is intertwined with tech. And several years ago at Facebook, I actually said, guys, you're going to have to get the journalism involved, because if you're not going to protect the public sphere, who will? Well, look at what's happening now, right? It's starting in the United States, but they're bringing in, and they're calling it individual newsletters, which anyway, let me not go there. So let's say, tech, journalism needs to survive. So in this time period, I sit on the advisory board of many different groups trying to think about the future. But one of them is the International Fund for Public Interest Media, which is trying to raise $1 billion a year to help small and medium-sized news organizations, independent news, public interest media to survive this. I keep doing this. That's my code for the valley of death, right? There's a valley of death right now. If we survive this, then we can keep going forward. And then finally, the last part is, look, journalists, sometimes we forget that so let me just put it this way. The elevator pitch of Rappler in 2012 is that we build communities of action, and the food we feed our communities is journalism. These communities of action impact our world. That was how I measured the metric of Rappler, because in the end, I was tired of throwing stories into a black hole. What I wanted is, you know, these stupid idea of technology actually jump-starting development in a country like the Philippines. And we were able to do that up until 2016. So there is a solution. And the first step is to really, I keep appealing to Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, Google, because these now rule our lives. They are the new gatekeepers, and they must take responsibility, because even if they give it to an algorithm, the algorithm was created by them. And it has there's a film called Coded Bias. It has their coded bias. So in enlightened self-interest, I'll end it with this. Great quote by an American biologist who studied ants, right? So this is why I like emergent behavior. So he studied ants, and he said that the greatest crisis we're facing, this is E.O. Wilson, he said that we're dealing with Paleolithic emotions. Our brains haven't changed, our emotions. So Paleolithic emotions, medieval institutions, they're still in the old world, and godlike technology. And I am actually absolutely certain we must find our way forward. And I think this year, next year, they have to be pivotal, because you've already seen the impact from 2016 to today. And when I watched what happened on January 6th on
Capitol Hill, yep.
It was not a surprise, right?
Yeah.
But
and also it's this manifestation of what's virtual is real, you know, in its ugliest forms, I guess. You know, if you think this is only happening online, well, you know, it's real. We're running out of time, and I'm sorry for, I apologize to those who are recording, because I know we've kind of we've gone over, but I have one last question about power. I mean, your life's work is about standing up to those in power, telling the truth. You've paid a price for that. You continue to pay a price for that. You've witnessed, as you say, world-changing moments. You've witnessed division within your own country among the public. You know, your country is battling not just the drug wars, but I think the ethos of this as well, and with a strong man. I want to end this on the theme of power. And in your work, where do you think power lies now? Do you think it lies with the political power, or do you think it lies with the big four, the tech powers?
I would say power and money, right? That's always been what we have held to account as journalists. It's power and money, and so many of the reasons why the world is the way it is today is because of that. I rail in the Philippines. Why do we accept this? Because it is power and money. The answer is both, right? Like the enabler is technology. It accelerated a trend that had already started. And I would peg the start to 2014 again. In 2014, I saw kind of this nostalgia for strongman rule. In India, Modi was elected. I was covering the Indonesian elections, world's largest Muslim population, right? And there, the former son-in-law of Suharto, Prabowo, almost won. By just a squeak, he almost won, and Jokowi took over. But I could see that in the United States, I could see the world had changed so fast. And this is the irony. When the world changed so fast, I think people wanted someone else to make their decisions. And so that's when you came into this kind of, in the Philippines, I saw it with Marcos, the kind of nostalgia for someone else to make the decision. Technology enabled that. The rise of digital populism, this was always there before, but it is almost unstoppable in the virtual world, given the way the social media platforms are designed and the way they work. So look, I guess we haven't lost our power yet. The fact that you're talking to me means I'm not the sound of one hand clapping yet. It could be, right? I mean, but rail against the dying light. We're going to keep doing our jobs. So we hold power and money to account. And I hope, I guess the
whichever kind of power it is, I guess that's the thing.
Right now they help each other, right? I mean, even look at, well, anyway, let me not go there because it opens another can of worms. I guess I'll say one thing. I jumped out of the plane. I have a parachute on. I don't know whether it will open. And that's the life I'm living right now. And it's okay, because I know my task in Rappler is to just hold up the sky, absorb the blows so my team can work. And that's working so far. So let's see. We have presidential elections next year. I hope significant changes would have happened both in tech and in journalism, because people are afraid when you have an environment of violence and fear and uncertainty with the pandemic now, right? Fear, uncertainty, isolation. This is perfect for a dictator.
So you're hopeful, though?
Always. I have no choice but to be, I mean, there's no other option. And it's actually quite exciting. You asked me about advice for a young journalist. Guys, go in. This is it. This time matters. I mean, you're not gonna be asked to make coffee like my time when we first came in. This time matters, right? Yeah. You can start now. Do something better than my generation did.
Maria Ressa, thank you so much. And again, congratulations on your UNESCO Guillermo Kano World Press Freedom Award. Very well deserved and great to talk to you.